Welcome back to Simply About Earth, the channel where we explore the incredible stories that shaped our world. Before we dive into today's journey through ancient Mesopotamia, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love connecting with our global community of history enthusiasts. Today we're embarking on an epic journey spanning nearly 3 millennia from humanity's first tentative steps towards civilization to the rise and fall of the world's earliest empires. This is the story of Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization itself. The emergence of human civilization did not occur in a vacuum, nor was it the product of sudden inspiration. Instead, it arose from a remarkable confluence of geographic, climatic, and technological factors that converged in a specific region of the ancient Near East approximately 12,000 years ago. This transformation would fundamentally alter the trajectory of human development, establishing patterns of social organization, technological innovation, and cultural complexity that continue to influence our world today. Picture, if you will, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers flowing roughly parallel through what is now modern Iraq, Syria, and southeastern Turkey. These twin waterways, originating in the Armenian highlands and converging near the Persian Gulf, created a unique geographic environment that would prove instrumental in humanity's transition from nomadic existence to settled civilization. These rivers carried with them something far more valuable than water alone: massive quantities of fertile alluvium eroded from the mountainous regions upstream. During seasonal floods, these rivers deposited layers of nutrient-rich sediment across the surrounding plains, creating some of the most fertile agricultural land on Earth. This annual cycle of inundation and deposition transformed an otherwise arid landscape into a verdant corridor of exceptional productivity. The alluvial deposits contained essential minerals, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, creating soil conditions that could support intensive agriculture without the need for external fertilization. The geographic positioning of Mesopotamia between these rivers created natural boundaries that both protected and connected early settlements. The rivers served as transportation corridors, enabling the movement of goods, people, and ideas across considerable distances. Simultaneously, the surrounding deserts and mountains provided natural barriers against potential invaders, while channeling trade routes through specific passages that could be controlled and taxed by emerging political entities. This was nature's perfect laboratory for the development of complex civilization. The transition from nomadic hunter-gatherer societies to permanent agricultural settlements did not occur overnight. Archaeological evidence indicates that this process, known as the Neolithic Revolution, unfolded gradually between approximately 10,000 and 8,000 BC. During this period, small bands of hunter-gatherers who had previously followed seasonal migration patterns began to establish semi-permanent camps near reliable water sources and areas with naturally occurring wild grains. These early settlers possessed detailed knowledge of their environment accumulated through generations of seasonal movement and observation. They understood the growth cycles of wild wheat, corn, and barley, recognizing which varieties produced the largest seeds and grew most reliably. This botanical expertise proved crucial as they began the process of plant domestication, selectively harvesting and replanting seeds from the most productive specimens. The establishment of permanent settlements required fundamental changes in social organization and daily life. Hunter-gatherer bands, typically consisting of 25 to 30 individuals, were forced to develop new methods of resource allocation, conflict resolution, and labor division. The construction of permanent structures demanded specialized knowledge of building techniques, while the storage of surplus grain required the development of new technologies for preservation and protection against pests and moisture. Early settlements in the Fertile Crescent reveal evidence of increasingly sophisticated architectural techniques. Houses constructed from mud brick and stone foundations replaced temporary shelters made from animal skins and wooden frames. These structures featured multiple rooms, storage areas, and specialized spaces for food preparation and craft production. The standardization of building techniques and the emergence of common architectural elements suggest the development of shared cultural practices and technical knowledge. The accumulation of agricultural surplus fundamentally altered social relationships within these early communities. For the first time in human history, not every individual needed to participate directly in food production. This liberation of human labor enabled the development of specialized crafts, including pottery production, textile weaving, and tool manufacturing. Archaeological sites from this period reveal increasingly sophisticated ceramic vessels decorated with intricate geometric patterns and designed for specific functional purposes. The role of climate change in facilitating this transformation cannot be overstated. The end of the last ice age, approximately 11,700 years ago, initiated a period of global warming that dramatically altered precipitation patterns and seasonal temperature variations across the Near East. The retreating glaciers released vast quantities of fresh water, raising sea levels and creating more stable river systems with predictable flood cycles. This climatic shift eliminated many of the environmental uncertainties that had previously made permanent settlement impractical. Seasonal temperature variations became less extreme, extending growing seasons and enabling multiple harvests per year in favorable locations. Increased precipitation in the highland regions fed the river systems more consistently, providing reliable water sources for both human consumption and irrigation. The warming climate also expanded the range of wild plant species that could serve as potential crops. Archaeological botanists have identified numerous varieties of legumes, including lentils, peas, and chickpeas, that became available for cultivation as temperatures rose and growing seasons lengthened. These protein-rich crops complemented cereal grains, providing more complete nutrition and enabling larger populations to be sustained on smaller areas of cultivated land. Population growth during this period created both opportunities and challenges for early agricultural communities. Larger settlements could support more specialized labor, leading to technological innovations and increased productivity. However, they also required more sophisticated systems of resource management and social coordination. Archaeological evidence suggests that some communities reached populations of several hundred individuals by 8000 BC, necessitating new forms of leadership and decision-making processes. The proto-urban center of Tel Es-Sorwan, located along the Tigris River in central Iraq, provides remarkable insight into the sophistication achieved by these early agricultural societies, occupied between approximately 6000 and 5500 BC. This settlement covered nearly 6 hectares and supported an estimated population of 1000 to 1500 individuals. The site reveals evidence of planned urban layout with residential areas separated from craft production zones and public spaces. Excavations at Tel Es-Sorwan have uncovered extensive irrigation systems that demonstrate advanced hydraulic engineering capabilities. These installations included primary canals that diverted water from the Tigris River, secondary distribution channels that carried water to individual field plots, and sophisticated drainage systems that prevented waterlogging and soil salinization. The precision of these constructions suggests the existence of specialized engineers who possessed detailed understanding of water flow dynamics and soil management techniques. The irrigation infrastructure at Tel Es-Sorwan required coordinated labor efforts involving hundreds of individuals working under centralized direction. Archaeological evidence indicates that canal construction and maintenance were organized as community-wide projects with different households contributing specific types of labor based on their specialized skills. This level of coordination implies the existence of formal leadership structures and standardized work practices that extended beyond individual family units. Craft specialization at Tel Es-Sorwan reached levels of sophistication previously unknown in human societies. Pottery workshops produced standardized vessel forms using advanced techniques, including the potter's wheel and controlled kiln firing. These ceramic products were not merely functional but displayed artistic elements, including painted decorations, sculptural details, and symbolic motifs that suggests the development of shared cultural meanings and aesthetic values. Textile production at the site involved the cultivation of flax and the domestication of sheep for wool production. Archaeological remains include spindle halls, loom weights, and fabric impressions preserved on clay surfaces, indicating the production of woven textiles in various patterns and qualities. The standardization of textile production techniques and the evidence for surplus production suggests that these goods were traded with other settlements across considerable distances. The settlement of Chogamami, located in the Diyala River Valley east of Baghdad, represents another crucial example of early urban development in Mesopotamia. Occupied between approximately 6000 and 5500 BC, this site demonstrates even more advanced irrigation technologies and urban planning concepts. The settlement was organized around a central plaza surrounded by residential compounds, each containing multiple structures arranged around internal courtyards. The irrigation system at Chogamami included innovations that would become standard features of Mesopotamian agriculture for millennia. Engineers constructed check dams across seasonal watercourses to capture and redirect floodwaters, while elaborate canal networks distributed this water across extensive field systems. Archaeological surveys have identified irrigation channels extending more than 10 kilometers from the main settlement, indicating the ability to manage water resources across vast agricultural territories. The agricultural productivity achieved at Chogamami supported population densities that approached those of later urban centers. Botanical remains recovered from storage facilities include not only cereal grains but also dates, figs, and other tree crops that required long-term agricultural planning and investment. The cultivation of date palms in particular demonstrates sophisticated understanding of agricultural techniques, as these trees require several years to mature and produce fruit. Evidence from Chogamami also reveals the emergence of social stratification based on differential access to resources and specialized knowledge. Residential compounds varied significantly in size and architectural sophistication, with larger structures featuring more elaborate decorative elements and greater numbers of storage facilities. These differences suggest that some individuals or families had accumulated greater wealth and social status, possibly through control of irrigation systems or specialized craft production. The technological innovations developed at these early urban centers had profound implications for subsequent human development. The irrigation techniques pioneered in Mesopotamia enabled agricultural production in regions previously considered unsuitable for farming, dramatically expanding the geographic range of human settlement. The organizational systems developed to manage these complex agricultural projects provided models for political administration that would influence governmental structures throughout the ancient world. The transition from hunter-gatherer societies to agricultural settlements also initiated fundamental changes in human relationships with the natural environment. Rather than adapting to existing ecological conditions, agricultural communities began actively modifying their surroundings to increase productivity and support larger populations. This shift from adaptation to manipulation would characterize human-environmental relationships throughout subsequent history, with consequences that continue to shape our world today. The development of surplus agricultural production created the economic foundation for all subsequent forms of social complexity. The ability to support non-agricultural specialists enabled the emergence of full-time craftsmen, religious practitioners, political leaders, and military forces. These specialized roles in turn facilitated technological innovation, cultural development, and territorial expansion that would characterize the great civilizations of the ancient world. The geographic advantages of the Tigris-Euphrates river system continued to attract human settlement and technological innovation throughout the prehistoric period. The combination of fertile alluvial soils, reliable water sources, and natural transportation corridors created conditions that supported increasingly large and complex societies. The agricultural techniques and social organizations developed during the Neolithic Revolution provided the foundation for the emergence of the world's first true urban civilizations in the 4th millennium BC. The sophisticated agricultural settlements of the 7th and 6th millennia BC established the technological and social foundations for an unprecedented transformation in human organization. By 4000 BC, the accumulated innovations in irrigation, craft production, and social coordination had reached a critical threshold that enabled the emergence of genuinely urban societies. The descendants of the early farmers at Tel Es-Sorwan and Chogamami would witness the birth of the world's first city-states, marking humanity's transition from agricultural villages to complex urban civilizations. The Uruk period, spanning from approximately 4000 to 3100 BC, represents the most significant developmental phase in human social organization since the Neolithic Revolution. During these 9 centuries, the alluvial plains of southern Mesopotamia became the stage for revolutionary changes in settlement patterns, technological capabilities, and administrative systems. The transformation was not gradual, but occurred with remarkable rapidity, suggesting that critical innovations in one area catalyzed rapid development across multiple aspects of society. The city of Uruk itself emerged as the prototype for all subsequent urban centers. Located on the banks of the Euphrates River, in what is now southern Iraq, Uruk grew from a modest agricultural settlement to a sprawling metropolis covering more than 600 hectares by 3200 BC. Archaeological evidence indicates that the city supported a population of approximately 50,000 inhabitants at its peak, making it by far the largest human settlement that had ever existed. The sheer scale of this urban concentration required entirely new approaches to resource management, social organization, and territorial control. The physical layout of Uruk reveals sophisticated urban planning principles that would influence city design throughout Mesopotamian history. The settlement was organized around 2 primary religious complexes: the Anu precinct dedicated to the sky god Anu, and the Ayana precinct associated with the goddess Inanna. These sacred areas occupied elevated positions within the city and featured monumental architecture constructed from millions of mud bricks. The famous White Temple, built atop a massive artificial platform called a ziggurat, stood approximately 13 meters above the surrounding plain and could be seen from distances of several kilometers. The construction of these monumental buildings required organizational capabilities that exceeded anything previously achieved in human history. The White Temple alone incorporated an estimated 1,400 tons of limestone and bitumen, materials that had to be transported from quarries located hundreds of kilometers away. The labor requirements for such projects involved coordinating the work of thousands of individuals across multiple construction seasons. Archaeological analysis of brick stamps and construction techniques reveals standardized production methods that enable different work crews to contribute compatible components to the overall structure. The residential areas of Uruk displayed clear evidence of social stratification based on differential access to resources and proximity to religious centers. Elite compounds near the temple complexes featured multi-room houses constructed around central courtyards with specialized areas for food preparation, craft production, and storage. These structures incorporated architectural elements, including decorated doorways, internal drainage systems, and private wells, that distinguished them from more modest dwellings in peripheral areas of the city. The economic foundation of Uruk's growth rested on agricultural intensification achieved through expanded irrigation systems and improved crop varieties. Archaeological surveys have identified irrigation canals extending more than 20 kilometers from the city, creating an agricultural territory capable of supporting the urban population. These waterworks incorporated sophisticated engineering features, including sluice gates, settling basins, and branch channels, that enabled precise control over water distribution. The management of such extensive infrastructure required specialized knowledge and coordinated administration that exceeded the capabilities of traditional kinship-based social organization. The city of Ur, located approximately 300 kilometers southeast of Uruk, developed along similar lines but with distinct characteristics that reflected local environmental conditions and cultural preferences. Founded around 3800 BC, Ur was positioned near the confluence of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, providing access to both riverine transportation and marine resources from the Persian Gulf. The city's location enabled it to serve as a crucial link in emerging trade networks that connected Mesopotamia with distant regions, including the Iranian Plateau, Anatolia, and the Indus Valley. Archaeological excavations at Ur have revealed evidence of remarkable technological sophistication in metallurgy and craft production. The royal cemetery, dating to approximately 2600 BC, contained artifacts that demonstrate mastery of advanced metalworking techniques, including granulation, filigree, and complex alloy production. Gold helmets discovered in royal burials were constructed from single sheets of metal hammered into intricate forms that replicated woven textiles. Silver vessels featured decorative elements created through repoussé techniques that required specialized tools and extensive technical knowledge. The city of Eridu, traditionally considered the oldest settlement in Mesopotamia, occupied a unique position in early Sumerian civilization as the legendary seat of divine authority. Archaeological evidence indicates continuous occupation from approximately 5400 BC, making it one of the longest inhabited sites in human history. The city's religious significance stemmed from its association with Enki, the god of fresh water and wisdom, whose temple complex grew through successive rebuilding phases into one of the most impressive architectural achievements of the early urban period. The temple sequence at Eridu provides crucial evidence for understanding the evolution of Mesopotamian religious architecture and administrative practices. The earliest shrine, constructed around 5000 BC, was a simple rectangular structure measuring approximately 3 by 4 meters. Over the subsequent millennia, this building was repeatedly demolished and rebuilt on an increasingly grand scale, with each new iteration incorporating architectural innovations and expanded functional areas. By 3000 BC, the temple complex covered more than 2,000 square meters, and included specialized areas for ritual activities, administrative functions, and storage of religious offerings. Lagash emerged somewhat later than the other major Sumerian cities, but quickly developed into one of the most powerful and influential city-states of the early urban period. Located in the eastern portion of the Sumerian heartland, Lagash controlled extensive agricultural territories irrigated by waters from both the Tigris and Euphrates river systems. The city's strategic position enabled its rulers to regulate trade routes connecting central Mesopotamia with the Iranian highlands and the Persian Gulf region. The administrative archives discovered at Lagash provide unprecedented insight into the complexity of early urban management systems. Thousands of clay tablets record transactions involving agricultural products, craft goods, labor assignments, and religious offerings. These documents reveal sophisticated accounting methods that tracked resources with remarkable precision, including calculations of field productivity, livestock inventories, and workshop output. The level of detail preserved in these records indicates that urban administrators possessed mathematical skills and organizational capabilities that enabled them to manage economic activities across vast territories. The revolutionary invention of writing emerged directly from the administrative needs of these expanding urban centers. The earliest known writing system developed at Uruk around 3200 BC. As a practical solution to the challenge of tracking complex economic transactions and resource allocations, initial experiments with symbolic representation began with simple pictographic signs carved into clay tablets using reed styluses. These early symbols represented concrete objects and quantities. A drawing of a sheep indicated sheep, parallel lines represented numbers, and combined symbols recorded transactions involving specific quantities of particular commodities. The transformation from pictographic to logographic representation occurred rapidly, as scribes discovered more efficient methods for recording complex information. Rather than drawing detailed pictures of objects, They developed simplified symbols that could be quickly inscribed in wet clay. The physical properties of clay tablets influenced the evolution of these symbols. As curved lines were difficult to produce cleanly in the medium, scribes began using combinations of straight lines and wedge-shaped marks that could be impressed rapidly and uniformly into the clay surface. The development of syllabic writing marked a crucial breakthrough that enabled the recording of abstract concepts, personal names, and grammatical elements that could not be represented pictographically. Scribes discovered that symbols originally representing concrete objects could also represent the sounds of those words when spoken. This rebus principle allowed them to construct written versions of complex spoken language by combining symbols that represented syllabic sounds rather than specific meanings. The cuneiform writing system that emerged from these innovations possessed remarkable flexibility and expressive capability. Scribes could record not only economic transactions but also legal documents, religious texts, historical narratives, and literary compositions. The standardization of sign forms and writing conventions enabled communication across different cities and regions, facilitating the development of shared cultural practices and administrative procedures throughout the Sumerian world. The establishment of formal governmental structures represented another fundamental innovation of the early urban period. Traditional kinship-based leadership systems proved inadequate for managing the complex social and economic relationships that characterized city-state societies. The concentration of large populations in urban centers created new forms of social conflict that required institutional mechanisms for resolution, while the coordination of large-scale construction projects and agricultural systems demanded centralized decision-making authority. The institution of kingship emerged as a solution to these organizational challenges, though early Sumerian political systems retained important limitations on royal authority. The earliest rulers, known as Insi, functioned primarily as temple administrators and representatives of divine will rather than absolute monarchs. These priest-kings derived their legitimacy from their role as intermediaries between human communities and the gods who were believed to own the city and its surrounding territory. The Lugal, or big man, represented a different form of leadership that emerged during periods of military conflict or crisis. Unlike the Ensi, whose authority derived from religious sanction, the Lugal gained power through demonstrated military capability and success in protecting the community from external threats. Over time, successful Lugal rulers consolidated their authority and established hereditary dynasties that combined both religious and military functions. The development of legal codes and administrative systems reflected the need for standardized procedures to manage increasingly complex social relationships. The earliest known legal documents from Sumerian cities established principles for resolving disputes over property ownership, commercial transactions, and personal injury. These codes recognized different categories of social status and prescribed specific penalties for various offenses, creating formal alternatives to traditional methods of conflict resolution based on kinship obligations or personal revenge. Administrative systems developed to support urban governance incorporated sophisticated methods for record-keeping, resource allocation, and personnel management. Temple complexes functioned as the primary administrative centers, employing hundreds of scribes, accountants, and supervisors who maintained detailed records of agricultural production, craft manufacturing, and trade activities. These bureaucratic institutions created career paths for educated individuals and established professional standards that ensured continuity of administrative practices across generations. The military institutions and administrative systems that emerged during the early urban period operated within a complex religious framework that permeated every aspect of Sumerian society. The gods were not distant abstract entities, but active participants in daily life who owned the cities, controlled natural forces, and determined the fate of individuals and communities. This intimate relationship between divine and human realms created a theological system that legitimized political authority, organized economic activity, and provided meaning for the unprecedented social transformations occurring throughout Mesopotamia. The Sumerian pantheon reflected the hierarchical nature of urban society, with major deities controlling specific domains of existence and maintaining relationships that mirrored earthly political structures. At the apex of this divine hierarchy stood Anu, the sky god whose authority encompassed the heavens and established the fundamental order of the universe. Anu's position as king of the gods provided the theological foundation for human kingship, as earthly rulers claimed to derive their authority from divine appointment and to serve as representatives of cosmic order on earth. The god Enlil occupied a crucial position as lord of the air and executive of divine decisions. Unlike Anu, whose authority remained largely theoretical, Enlil actively intervened in human affairs through control of wind, storms, and agricultural fertility. His temple complex at Nippur served as the religious center of Sumer, where representatives from all major city-states gathered to acknowledge his supremacy and seek divine approval for important political decisions. The concept of divine mandate that legitimized royal authority throughout Mesopotamian history originated from Enlil's role as the god who bestowed kingship upon worthy human rulers. Enlil's authority extended beyond political legitimation to encompass the practical management of agricultural systems that supported urban civilization. Seasonal floods, rainfall patterns, and crop fertility were understood as manifestations of his will, making the maintenance of proper ritual relationships with this deity essential for community survival. The timing of agricultural activities, the construction of irrigation systems, and the distribution of surplus production all required divine sanction obtained through elaborate ceremonies conducted at his temples. The god Enki, master of fresh water and divine wisdom, provided the technological knowledge that enabled human civilization to flourish in the challenging environment of southern Mesopotamia. Unlike other major deities who maintained some distance from human concerns, Enki was portrayed as actively benevolent toward humanity, providing the skills and knowledge necessary for urban life. The arts of irrigation, metallurgy, brewing, and textile production were all attributed to his divine instruction, making him the patron of craftsmen and engineers, whose specialized knowledge supported urban economies. Enki's association with fresh water gave him particular importance in the irrigation-dependent agriculture of Mesopotamia. The complex canal systems that distributed river water across vast agricultural territories were understood as earthly manifestations of his divine domain. The technical knowledge required to design and maintain these waterworks was considered sacred wisdom that could only be obtained through proper ritual relationship with the god. Master engineers and hydraulic specialists served as priests in his temples, combining practical expertise with religious authority. The goddess Inanna occupied a unique position within the Sumerian pantheon as the deity of love, fertility, and warfare. Her dual nature reflected the complex realities of urban life where creative and destructive forces operated in constant tension. As goddess of fertility, she ensured agricultural abundance and human reproduction that sustained growing urban populations. As goddess of warfare, she provided divine sanction for the military conflicts that characterized relationships between competing city-states. Inanna's association with both love and war reflected sophisticated theological understanding of the interconnected nature of creative and destructive forces in human society. The same divine power that ensured agricultural fertility and human reproduction could be channeled toward military conquest and territorial expansion. This theological framework provided religious justification for the aggressive expansion policies pursued by successful Sumerian rulers who claimed to act as instruments of divine will. The goddess's prominent role in Sumerian religion also reflected the relatively high status of women in early urban society. Unlike later Mesopotamian civilizations where female deities were subordinated to male gods, Inanna maintained independent authority and actively challenged other divine figures. Her mythological adventures, including her descent to the underworld and her conflicts with other gods, provided models for human behavior that emphasized personal agency and the pursuit of individual goals within established social structures. These major deities were supported by hundreds of minor gods and goddesses who controlled specific aspects of daily life, from household activities to specialized crafts. Each profession, each neighborhood, and each family maintained relationships with particular divine patrons who provided protection and assistance in exchange for proper ritual observance. This elaborate theological system created multiple layers of divine authority that paralleled and reinforced the complex social hierarchies of urban civilization. The architectural expression of this religious system reached its most impressive form in the monumental temple complexes known as ziggurats. These massive stepped pyramids dominated the skylines of Sumerian cities and served as both religious centers and symbols of civic achievement. The Great Ziggurat of Ur, constructed during the 21st century BC under the patronage of King Ur-Nammu, exemplifies the sophisticated engineering capabilities and religious devotion that characterize these remarkable structures. The ziggurat rose approximately 30 meters above the surrounding plain through 3 distinct terrace levels, each constructed from millions of mud bricks manufactured according to standardized specifications. The lowest level measured roughly 64 by 46 meters at its base and stood 15 meters high, providing a massive foundation for the upper levels. The second terrace measured approximately 48 by 32 meters and added another 8 meters of height, while the uppermost level supported a temple structure dedicated to the moon god Nana. The construction techniques employed in the ziggurat demonstrate remarkable understanding of structural engineering principles and material science. The builders incorporated drainage systems within the structure to prevent water damage from seasonal rains and flooding. Bitumen waterproofing protected vulnerable joints and surfaces, while woven reed mats placed between brick courses provided flexibility that allowed the massive structure to settle evenly without cracking. The exterior surfaces were covered with fired brick facades that provided weather protection and created impressive visual effects through varied colors and textures. The interior of the ziggurat contained a complex network of chambers, corridors, and staircases that served various religious and administrative functions. Storage rooms held offerings brought by worshippers, while specialized chambers housed the ritual equipment and sacred objects used in temple ceremonies. Administrative offices within the structure accommodated the large staff of priests, scribes, and servants required to maintain temple operations and manage the extensive economic activities associated with religious institutions. The Great Ziggurat served not only as a religious center, but also as a powerful symbol of political authority and economic prosperity. The massive scale of the structure demonstrated the city's ability to mobilize enormous resources and coordinate complex construction projects. The sophisticated engineering and architectural details showcased the technical capabilities of craftsmen and engineers. The permanent visibility of the ziggurat across the surrounding landscape proclaimed the city's dominance over its agricultural territories and subordinate settlements. The temple complexes associated with ziggurats functioned as integrated economic institutions that managed substantial portions of urban wealth and agricultural production. The Temple of Nana at Ur controlled approximately 3,000 hectares of agricultural land worked by dependent laborers who received rations in exchange for their services. Temple workshops produced textiles, metalwork, and other craft goods that were traded throughout Mesopotamia and beyond. The institution maintained herds of cattle, sheep, and goats that provided meat, dairy products, and raw materials for various industries. Temple administrators developed sophisticated accounting systems to track the complex economic activities under their control. Thousands of cuneiform tablets from temple archives record transactions involving agricultural products, craft goods, labor assignments, and ritual offerings. These documents reveal mathematical capabilities that enabled precise calculation of field productivity, workshop output, and resource allocation across multiple economic sectors. The standardized accounting methods developed by temple bureaucracies provided models for commercial and governmental record-keeping throughout Mesopotamian civilization. The relationship between temple economies and secular governance created complex institutional arrangements that varied significantly between different city-states and historical periods. In some cities, temple administrators functioned essentially as government officials who managed public resources under royal supervision. In others, religious institutions maintained substantial independence and competed with secular authorities for control over economic activities and political influence. The city of Lagash provides detailed evidence for the intricate relationships between religious and secular economic management. During the 24th century BC, the Temple of Ningirsu at Jersu controlled extensive agricultural territories and manufacturing workshops that generated substantial surpluses for the city-state. However, secular officials appointed by the ruler also maintained independent administrative systems that managed royal lands and collected taxes from private citizens. The two institutions cooperated in major construction projects and military campaigns, while competing for influence over trade policies and resource allocation decisions. Temple priests occupied crucial positions within these economic systems as specialized administrators who possessed both religious authority and technical expertise. The management of large-scale irrigation projects required detailed knowledge of hydraulic engineering, seasonal weather patterns, and soil conditions that was preserved and transmitted through temple schools. The coordination of craft production demanded understanding of manufacturing techniques, quality control standards, and market conditions that enabled temples to compete effectively in interregional trade networks. The educational systems operated by temple institutions created professional classes of scribes, accountants, and administrators whose skills were essential for urban governance and economic management. Temple schools taught not only religious texts and ritual procedures, but also mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and legal principles. Graduates of these institutions staffed both religious and secular administrative positions, creating shared professional standards and cultural values that unified the educated elite across different institutional boundaries. Religious festivals and ritual celebrations provided crucial mechanisms for integrating diverse urban populations and reinforcing social hierarchies within city-state societies. The New Year festival at Babylon, which lasted for 11 days during the spring equinox, involved elaborate processions, dramatic performances, and communal feasting that brought together citizens from all social levels. The king played a central role in these ceremonies, performing ritual acts that symbolically renewed his divine mandate and demonstrated his continued fitness to rule. During the New Year celebration, the king underwent ritual humiliation before the god Marduk, surrendering his royal regalia and submitting to symbolic punishment for any failures during the previous year. This ceremony served multiple functions. It demonstrated royal accountability to divine authority, provided a controlled outlet for popular criticism of governmental policies, and created dramatic tension that heightened the significance of the king's ritual restoration to power. The successful completion of these ceremonies confirmed divine approval for continued royal authority and renewed the cosmic order for another year. Similar festivals throughout Mesopotamian cities combined religious observance with political theater and economic activity. Sacred marriage ceremonies reenacted mythological unions between gods and goddesses, while celebrating the fertility of agricultural lands and human communities. Harvest festivals marked the completion of agricultural cycles and provided occasions for redistributing surplus production to urban populations. Military victory celebrations honored gods, who had provided divine assistance in warfare while displaying captured wealth and prisoners that demonstrated royal success. The concept of divine kingship that emerged from these religious practices fundamentally shaped political development throughout Mesopotamian history. Unlike Egyptian pharaohs who were considered actual gods, Mesopotamian rulers were understood as mortal representatives of divine authority, who derived their legitimacy from proper relationship with the gods. This theological framework created both opportunities and limitations for royal power, as kings could claim divine sanction for their policies, while remaining subject to divine judgment for their actions. The theological framework that legitimized Mesopotamian kingship operated alongside revolutionary technological developments, that would fundamentally transform human civilization. While priests interpreted divine will and kings claimed celestial mandate, craftsmen and engineers were developing practical innovations that solved pressing challenges of transportation, agriculture, and trade. These technological breakthroughs emerged from the accumulated experience of generations of skilled workers who refined their techniques through systematic experimentation and careful observation of natural phenomena. The invention of the wheel around 3500 BC represents perhaps the most significant transportation revolution in human history. Though its development occurred through incremental improvements rather than sudden inspiration, archaeological evidence suggests that the concept originated from the potter's wheel, which Mesopotamian craftsmen had been using since approximately 3800 BC to create symmetrical ceramic vessels. These early potter's wheels consisted of heavy stone discs that rotated on vertical axles, enabling artisans to shape clay with unprecedented precision and speed. The transition from potter's wheel to transportation device required solving complex engineering challenges related to axle construction, bearing systems, and load distribution. Early wheels were solid wooden discs cut from single tree trunks with holes drilled through their centers to accommodate wooden axles. These primitive wheels were extremely heavy and generated substantial friction, limiting their effectiveness for long-distance transportation. However, they proved invaluable for short-distance movement of heavy materials within urban construction sites and agricultural areas. The development of spoked wheels around 3000 BC marked a crucial advancement that dramatically improved transportation efficiency. Sumerian craftsmen discovered that wheels constructed with wooden spokes radiating from central hubs could support equivalent loads while weighing significantly less than solid disc wheels. This innovation required sophisticated understanding of structural engineering principles, as the spokes had to be precisely positioned and securely attached to distribute weight evenly across the wheel's circumference. The construction of spoked wheels demanded specialized woodworking techniques and tools that pushed Mesopotamian craftsmanship to new levels of precision. Artisans developed bronze saws, chisels, and boring tools that enabled them to create standardized wheel components with consistent dimensions and tolerances. The assembly process required careful measurement and fitting to ensure that completed wheels would rotate smoothly and maintain structural integrity under heavy loads. Master wheelwrights emerged as highly valued specialists whose expertise commanded premium compensation and social recognition. The integration of wheeled vehicles into Mesopotamian transportation systems revolutionized trade relationships and military capabilities throughout the region. Two-wheeled carts pulled by domesticated donkeys could transport loads of grain, textiles, and manufactured goods across distances that would have been impractical for human porters. Four-wheeled wagons provided platforms for moving massive stone blocks and timber beams required for monumental construction projects. The standardization of wheel sizes and axle dimensions enabled the development of road systems with consistent track widths that facilitated inter-regional commerce. Military applications of wheeled technology produced the war chariot, a revolutionary weapons platform that transformed battlefield tactics throughout the ancient Near East. Early Sumerian chariots were heavy four-wheeled vehicles that served primarily as mobile command posts and platforms for archers. The solid wooden wheels and crude suspension systems of these early chariots limited their speed and maneuverability, but they provided psychological advantages through their imposing appearance and elevated positions for commanders and elite warriors. The development of lighter two-wheeled chariots with spoked wheels around 2500 BC created genuine cavalry units that could maneuver rapidly across battlefields and pursue fleeing enemies. These vehicles required specially trained horses rather than donkeys, as their greater speed and agility demanded animals with superior strength and endurance. The breeding and training of war horses became specialized occupations that contributed to the emergence of aristocratic warrior classes throughout Mesopotamian society. Parallel to these developments in land transportation, Mesopotamian engineers were revolutionizing water-based travel through innovations in boat construction and sailing technology. The earliest vessels were simple reed boats constructed by binding together bundles of marsh reeds with rope made from plant fibers. These lightweight craft proved effective for navigating the shallow channels and marshy areas of the Tigris-Euphrates delta, but they lacked the structural integrity required for long-distance travel or heavy cargo transport. The development of wooden boat construction techniques around 3200 BC enabled the creation of larger, more durable vessels capable of extended river voyages and coastal navigation. Sumerian shipwrights learned to shape wooden planks and join them with wooden pegs and bitumen caulking to create watertight hulls. These early wooden boats featured flat bottoms that enabled navigation in shallow waters while providing stable platforms for cargo and passengers. The revolutionary invention of the sail transformed these improved boats into efficient long-distance transportation systems that could harness natural wind power. The earliest sails were simple square sheets of woven fabric suspended from horizontal poles, but even these primitive designs enabled boats to travel upstream against river currents or across open water without relying entirely on human rowing power. Archaeological depictions from around 3100 BC show Mesopotamian vessels equipped with both sails and oars, providing flexible propulsion systems that could adapt to varying wind and water conditions. The development of more sophisticated sailing techniques required detailed understanding of wind patterns, water currents, and seasonal weather variations. Mesopotamian sailors accumulated extensive knowledge of navigation principles through generations of practical experience, learning to read natural signs that indicated favorable conditions for different types of voyages. This expertise enabled them to establish regular trade routes connecting Mesopotamian cities with distant regions, including the Persian Gulf, the Levantine coast, and the Indus Valley. The construction of larger sailing vessels capable of maritime voyages demanded advances in shipbuilding technology that pushed Mesopotamian craftsmanship to new levels of sophistication. Seagoing ships required reinforced hull construction, improved waterproofing techniques, and specialized rigging systems that could withstand the stresses of ocean travel. Master shipwrights developed standardized construction methods that enabled the production of vessels with consistent performance characteristics and structural reliability. These transportation innovations facilitated the expansion of trade networks that connected Mesopotamian cities with resource-rich regions throughout the known world. Wheeled carts and sailing ships enabled merchants to transport bulk commodities across vast distances, making it economically feasible to obtain materials that were not available locally. Copper from Cyprus, tin from Afghanistan, cedar wood from Lebanon, and precious stones from India all flowed into Mesopotamian markets through these improved transportation systems. Simultaneously with these transportation breakthroughs, Mesopotamian farmers were developing agricultural technologies that would increase crop yields and expand the range of cultivable land. The invention of the plough around 3500 BC represented a fundamental advancement that enabled cultivation of heavier soils and larger field areas than had been possible with simple digging sticks and hoes. Early ploughs were basic wooden implements that scratched shallow furrows in prepared soil, but they significantly reduced the labor required for field preparation and enabled farmers to work larger areas within optimal planting seasons. The development of ox-drawn ploughs around 3000 BC multiplied agricultural productivity by harnessing animal power for field cultivation. These improved implements featured bronze-tipped plowshares that could cut through root systems and break up compacted soil more effectively than wooden points. The use of domesticated cattle as draft animals required new techniques for animal training, harness construction, and field management that transformed traditional farming practices. Mesopotamian farmers discovered that systematic plowing could improve soil fertility by burying crop residues and weeds that decomposed to provide nutrients for subsequent plantings. The practice of cross-plowing, where fields were cultivated in perpendicular directions, broke up soil clods more thoroughly and created better seedbed conditions. These techniques enabled farmers to maintain productive agriculture on the same fields for extended periods without the need for lengthy fallow periods that had characterized earlier farming systems. The integration of plowing with improved irrigation techniques created agricultural systems capable of supporting much larger urban populations than had been possible with earlier farming methods. Mesopotamian engineers developed sophisticated field layouts that combined drainage channels, irrigation ditches, and plowed furrows in coordinated systems that optimized water distribution and soil management. These integrated agricultural technologies enabled the cultivation of extensive territories around major cities, providing the food surpluses necessary to support specialized craftsmen, administrators, and military forces. The mathematical knowledge required to design and implement these complex agricultural and transportation systems led to revolutionary advances in numerical calculation and geometric measurement. Mesopotamian mathematicians developed the sexagesimal system based on the number 60, which provided more flexible calculation methods than earlier counting systems based on 10 or 12. This base 60 system enabled precise division of quantities into multiple fractional parts, making it particularly useful for distributing resources, calculating areas, and measuring time intervals. The sexagesimal system's mathematical advantages stemmed from 60's numerous divisors, which include 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30, and 60. This abundance of factors enabled Mesopotamian mathematicians to perform complex calculations involving fractions without requiring decimal notation systems that would not be developed until much later in mathematical history. Practical applications included calculating field areas for taxation purposes, determining material quantities for construction projects, and dividing inheritance shares among multiple heirs. The influence of sexagesimal mathematics extended far beyond practical calculations to establish measurement standards that continue to shape modern life. The division of hours into 60 minutes and minutes into 60 seconds derives directly from Mesopotamian mathematical traditions that proved so useful they were adopted by subsequent civilizations throughout the ancient world. Similarly, the 360-degree circle reflects sexagesimal principles, as 360 represents 6 cot 60 and provides a highly divisible unit for measuring angles and directions. Mesopotamian astronomers applied these mathematical tools to systematic observation of celestial phenomena, creating the world's first scientific approach to understanding planetary motions and seasonal cycles. The predictable movements of the sun, moon, and visible planets provided natural laboratories for testing mathematical theories and refining calculation techniques. Astronomical observations also had practical applications for agriculture, navigation, and religious ceremonies that required precise timing of seasonal events. The development of lunar calendar systems around 3000 BC enabled Mesopotamian societies to coordinate agricultural activities, religious festivals, and administrative functions according to predictable temporal frameworks. Early lunar calendars were based on the approximately 29.5-day cycle of lunar phases, with months beginning at each new moon. 12 lunar months created years of roughly 354 days, which gradually fell out of synchronization with seasonal agricultural cycles that followed the 365.25-day solar year. Mesopotamian astronomers solved this calendrical problem by developing sophisticated intercalation systems that added extra months at regular intervals to maintain alignment between lunar and solar cycles. These adjustments required precise mathematical calculations and long-term astronomical observations that demonstrated remarkable scientific sophistication. The resulting calendars provided stable frameworks for organizing complex urban societies while maintaining connection to natural cycles that governed agricultural productivity. The creation of accurate calendar systems facilitated the development of long-term planning capabilities that were essential for urban administration and economic management. Government officials could schedule construction projects, military campaigns, and tax collection activities according to predictable temporal frameworks. Merchants could coordinate trading expeditions with seasonal weather patterns and agricultural harvest cycles. Religious authorities could maintain consistent festival schedules that reinforce social cohesion and cultural identity. Solar calendar systems developed somewhat later provided even greater precision for agricultural and administrative planning. Mesopotamian astronomers discovered that the solar year contained approximately 365.25 days by carefully tracking the sun's position relative to fixed stars over extended observation periods. This knowledge enabled them to predict seasonal changes with remarkable accuracy and to develop planting schedules that maximized crop yields by taking advantage of optimal growing conditions. The integration of solar and lunar calendar systems created complex chronological frameworks that served different functions within Mesopotamian society. Lunar calendars remained important for religious observances and social activities that followed traditional monthly cycles. Solar calendars provided more accurate frameworks for agricultural planning and long-term administrative scheduling. The ability to convert between these different temporal systems required mathematical sophistication that further advanced Mesopotamian computational capabilities. Metallurgical innovations during this period revolutionized tool production and established the technological foundations for subsequent Bronze Age civilizations. Mesopotamian craftsmen had been working with native copper since approximately 4500 BC, learning to shape the malleable metal through hammering and basic heating techniques. However, pure copper's softness limited its effectiveness for cutting tools and weapons that required harder, more durable materials. The discovery of bronze production around 3500 BC represented a breakthrough that transformed metalworking from a specialized craft into a major industry. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, possessed superior hardness and durability compared to pure copper, while remaining workable through casting and forging techniques. The production of bronze required access to tin deposits, which were relatively rare and often located far from copper sources, creating the need for extensive trade networks that connected Mesopotamia with distant resource regions. The establishment of these long-distance trade relationships for metal procurement created some of the world's first truly international commercial networks. Mesopotamian merchants developed trade routes extending from Afghanistan, where tin deposits were abundant, to Cyprus and Anatolia, which provided high-quality copper ores. These trading expeditions required sophisticated logistical planning, diplomatic negotiations with foreign rulers, and financial arrangements that could support extended commercial ventures. The complexity of bronze production also necessitated advances in furnace technology and metallurgical techniques that pushed Mesopotamian craftsmanship to new levels of precision. Bronze casting required careful temperature control and precise alloy ratios to produce tools and weapons with consistent quality and performance characteristics. Master metalworkers developed specialized techniques for creating complex shapes through lost wax casting processes that enabled the production of intricate decorative objects and precisely engineered mechanical components. The sophisticated metallurgical techniques and international trade networks that emerged from Mesopotamian innovation created the technological and economic foundations for unprecedented political transformation. By 2400 BC, the accumulated wealth from bronze production, long-distance commerce, and agricultural intensification had concentrated sufficient resources in the hands of ambitious rulers to support military campaigns extending far beyond traditional city-state boundaries. The stage was set for the emergence of the world's first multi-ethnic empire. Sargon of Akkad emerged from obscurity around 2334 BC to establish the most extensive territorial dominion the world had yet witnessed. Unlike previous Mesopotamian rulers who had contented themselves with hegemony over neighboring city-states, Sargon conceived and executed a systematic campaign of conquest that brought diverse peoples and regions under unified imperial administration. His origins remain shrouded in legendary accounts that describe his discovery as an infant floating in a reed basket on the Euphrates River, but historical evidence indicates he began his career as a cupbearer to Ur-Zababa, king of the Sumerian city-state Kish. Sargon's rise to power coincided with increasing tensions between Sumerian city-states and Semitic-speaking populations, who had been gradually infiltrating Mesopotamia from the surrounding desert regions. These Semitic groups, known collectively as Akkadians, had adopted many aspects of Sumerian civilization while maintaining their distinct linguistic and cultural identity. They served as merchants, soldiers, and administrators within Sumerian cities, but remained politically subordinate to established Sumerian elites. Sargon's genius lay in recognizing that this growing Akkadian population could provide the military and administrative foundation for a new form of political organization that transcended traditional city-state boundaries. The conquest of Uruk around 2334 BC marked the beginning of Sargon's imperial campaigns and demonstrated the military innovations that would enable Akkadian success, rather than relying on traditional Sumerian tactics that emphasized heavily armored infantry fighting in tight formations. Sargon deployed mobile forces equipped with composite bows that could engage enemies at longer ranges while maintaining tactical flexibility. These composite bows, constructed from laminated wood, horn, and sinew, generated significantly more power than simple wooden bows and could penetrate the bronze armor worn by Sumerian warriors. The composite bow's construction required specialized craftsmanship that combined materials with different physical properties to create weapons with superior performance characteristics. The wooden core provided structural stability, while horn strips on the belly of the bow compressed under tension to store additional energy. Sinew backing on the outer surface stretched during the draw cycle, contributing elastic power that increased arrow velocity and penetration capability. The assembly process involved careful layering of these materials with animal-based adhesives, followed by extended curing periods that could last several months. Akkadian archers underwent intensive training that emphasized accuracy, rapid shooting, and coordinated tactical movements that maximized their weapons' effectiveness. Unlike Sumerian warriors who fought primarily as individual champions, Akkadian forces operated as disciplined units that could concentrate their firepower on specific targets while maintaining formation cohesion. This tactical approach proved devastatingly effective against traditional Sumerian armies, whose heavy infantry formations became vulnerable targets for mass archery attacks. The siege of Uruk lasted several months and showcased Akkadian innovations in siege warfare that would become standard features of ancient military practice. Sargon's engineers constructed earthwork ramps that enabled attackers to approach city walls at elevated levels, while mobile siege towers provided protected platforms for archers to engage defenders. The systematic investment of the city prevented relief forces from reaching the defenders and gradually weakened their resolve through hunger and disease. The fall of Uruk sent shockwaves throughout the Sumerian world and demonstrated that traditional defensive strategies were inadequate against Akkadian military innovations. City walls that had previously provided reliable protection became obstacles that could be overcome through patient siege operations and superior military engineering. The psychological impact of Uruk's defeat encouraged other Sumerian cities to submit to Akkadian authority, rather than face similar prolonged sieges that would devastate their populations and economies. Sargon's subsequent campaigns against Umma and Lagash followed similar patterns of systematic siege operations, combined with diplomatic negotiations that offered favorable terms to cities that submitted voluntarily. This approach enabled rapid territorial expansion, while minimizing the destruction that would have resulted from prolonged military resistance. Cities that accepted Akkadian rule retained their local institutions and religious practices, while acknowledging Sargon's supreme authority and contributing military forces and tribute to support imperial administration. The conquest of the Sumerian heartland provided Sargon with the economic resources and administrative expertise necessary to extend Akkadian control throughout Mesopotamia and beyond. The agricultural surplus generated by Sumerian irrigation systems supported the large standing armies required for extended campaigns, while Sumerian scribal traditions provided bureaucratic capabilities for managing diverse territorial holdings. The integration of Akkadian military innovations with Sumerian administrative systems created a hybrid imperial structure that proved remarkably effective for governing multi-ethnic populations across vast distances. The establishment of Akkad as the imperial capital around 2330 BC marked the beginning of systematic imperial administration that would influence governmental practices throughout subsequent Mesopotamian history. Unlike previous Mesopotamian cities that had grown organically around religious centers, Akkad was planned as an administrative hub designed to coordinate imperial activities across extensive territories. The city featured specialized districts for different governmental functions, including military headquarters, diplomatic quarters, and archives for storing the massive documentation required for imperial management. The location of Akkad near the confluence of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers provided strategic advantages for controlling transportation and communication throughout the empire. River traffic carrying tribute, trade goods, and official correspondence converged at the capital, enabling central authorities to monitor economic activities and maintain contact with distant provinces. The city's position also facilitated the deployment of military forces to any threatened region within the empire, as troops could travel by river transport to reach most major population centers within reasonable timeframes. Akkadian imperial administration incorporated Sumerian bureaucratic practices while adapting them to manage much larger and more diverse territories than any previous Mesopotamian state. Provincial governors, typically drawn from local elite families, maintained day-to-day administrative functions while reporting to Akkadian officials who ensured imperial policies were implemented consistently throughout the empire. This system balanced central control with local autonomy, enabling efficient governance while minimizing cultural conflicts that could destabilize imperial authority. The synthesis of Sumerian and Akkadian cultural traditions created new forms of artistic expression and intellectual achievement that reflected the cosmopolitan character of the empire. Akkadian sculptors adopted Sumerian artistic conventions while introducing stylistic innovations that emphasized individual personality and emotional expression. The famous bronze head discovered at Nineveh, possibly representing Sargon himself, demonstrates sophisticated casting techniques and artistic sensibilities that combined technical mastery with psychological insight. The adaptation of cuneiform writing to record the Akkadian language represented one of the most significant intellectual achievements of the imperial period. Sumerian cuneiform had been designed specifically for the Sumerian language, with its complex system of logographic and syllabic signs reflecting Sumerian grammatical structures and vocabulary. Akkadian as a Semitic language possessed fundamentally different grammatical patterns and phonetic characteristics that required substantial modifications to the existing writing system. Akkadian scribes solved this challenge by developing new conventions for representing Semitic grammatical features while retaining the basic cuneiform sign inventory inherited from Sumerian tradition. They created standardized methods for indicating verb conjugations, noun declensions, and other grammatical elements that had no direct equivalents in Sumerian. The resulting writing system maintained continuity with established Mesopotamian literary traditions while enabling the expression of Akkadian cultural concepts and administrative requirements. The bilingual character of Akkadian imperial administration necessitated the training of scribes who could function effectively in both Sumerian and Akkadian languages. Educational institutions throughout the empire developed curricula that combined traditional Sumerian literary texts with new Akkadian compositions, creating scholarly traditions that preserved ancient cultural heritage while adapting to contemporary needs. These educational programs produced generations of administrators who possessed the linguistic skills necessary for governing diverse populations and maintaining diplomatic relationships with foreign powers. Military innovations continued to evolve throughout Sargon's reign as Akkadian forces encountered different tactical challenges in various geographic regions. The conquest of territories extending from the Persian Gulf to Anatolia required adaptation to diverse terrain conditions and enemy capabilities that differed significantly from traditional Mesopotamian warfare. Mountain campaigns demanded different logistical arrangements and tactical approaches than operations in river valleys, while desert expeditions required specialized knowledge of navigation and water management. The development of organized standing armies represented a fundamental departure from previous Mesopotamian military practices. that had relied primarily on seasonal levies and temporary alliances between city-states. Akkadian professional soldiers received regular pay and equipment from imperial resources, enabling them to dedicate themselves entirely to military service, rather than dividing their time between farming and warfare. This professional military establishment provided the empire with rapid response capabilities and consistent tactical standards that could be maintained across diverse operational environments. The standardization of weapons and equipment throughout Akkadian forces facilitated logistics and maintenance while ensuring tactical compatibility between units drawn from different regions. Imperial armories produced bronze weapons according to standardized specifications, while specialized workshops manufactured composite bows with consistent performance characteristics. This systematic approach to military supply enabled the deployment of large forces over extended distances without compromising combat effectiveness. Through equipment shortages or incompatible weaponry, Sargon's campaigns beyond Mesopotamia extended Akkadian influence into regions that had previously maintained independence from any centralized authority. The conquest of Elam, located in the Zagros Mountains east of Mesopotamia, brought valuable mineral resources under imperial control while establishing strategic buffer zones against potential threats from the Iranian plateau. These mountain territories provided access to copper, silver, and precious stones that enhanced imperial wealth while supplying materials for expanded military production. The Western campaigns that brought Akkadian forces to the Mediterranean coast represented unprecedented territorial expansion that connected Mesopotamian civilization with entirely different cultural and economic systems. The conquest of Mari, located on the Middle Euphrates, provided control over crucial trade routes linking Mesopotamia with Anatolia and the Levant. The subjugation of territories in modern Syria and southeastern Turkey extended imperial boundaries to regions that had never experienced direct Mesopotamian political control. These extended campaigns required sophisticated logistical planning and diplomatic coordination that pushed Akkadian administrative capabilities to their limits. Supply lines extending hundreds of kilometers from the Mesopotamian heartland demanded careful management of transportation resources and strategic stockpiling of provisions at key locations. The integration of conquered territories with different agricultural systems and economic structures required flexible administrative approaches that could adapt imperial policies to local conditions. The reign of Naram-Sin, Sargon's grandson, who ruled from approximately 2254 to 2218 BC, marked the zenith of Akkadian imperial power and witnessed revolutionary developments in royal ideology that would influence Mesopotamian political concepts for millennia. Unlike his predecessors who had claimed divine sanction for their authority, Naram-Sin declared himself an actual god and demanded worship from his subjects as a living deity. This unprecedented assertion of divine kingship represented a fundamental departure from traditional Mesopotamian concepts of royal legitimacy. The deification of Naram-Sin found its most dramatic expression in his adoption of the horned crown, a divine symbol that had previously been reserved exclusively for representations of gods and goddesses. Royal inscriptions from his reign describe him as the god of Akkad, and record temples constructed for his worship in various parts of the empire. This theological innovation reflected the enormous expansion of royal power that had occurred during the early imperial period, and the need for new ideological frameworks to legitimize unprecedented territorial authority. The famous victory stele of Naram-Sin, discovered at Susa in western Iran, provides vivid documentation of this revolutionary royal ideology. While demonstrating the artistic sophistication achieved during the Akkadian period, the monument depicts the king wearing the horned crown of divinity, while leading his troops up a mountain slope toward defeated enemies. The composition breaks with traditional Mesopotamian artistic conventions by showing the king at a scale larger than other figures and positioning him in dynamic interaction with the landscape, rather than in static ceremonial poses. The artistic innovations and divine royal ideology that reached their peak under Naram-Sin could not prevent the gradual weakening of Akkadian imperial control that became increasingly evident during the late 23rd century BC. The vast territorial extent of the empire strained administrative resources beyond sustainable limits, while prolonged military campaigns depleted the professional armies that had enabled initial conquest. Rebellions erupted throughout the empire as local populations, initially cowed by Akkadian military superiority, recognized that imperial forces were overextended and vulnerable to coordinated resistance. The Gutian invasions from the Zagros Mountains delivered the final blow to Akkadian power around 2154 BC. These nomadic peoples, whom Mesopotamian texts describe as fierce mountain warriors who knew no restraint, swept down from their highland territories to overrun the exhausted Akkadian armies. Unlike previous conflicts that had involved organized states with similar military technologies, the Gutian assault represented a collision between settled civilization and nomadic warrior culture that exposed fundamental weaknesses in imperial defensive systems. The Gutians possessed military advantages that proved devastatingly effective against traditional Mesopotamian forces. Their cavalry units, mounted on horses rather than the donkeys typically used by Mesopotamian armies, provided superior mobility and striking power that could overwhelm infantry formations before they could organize effective resistance. The nomadic lifestyle of Gutian warriors made them virtually immune to the siege tactics that had proven so successful in Akkadian campaigns against fortified cities, as they possessed no permanent settlements that could be captured or destroyed. The collapse of centralized Akkadian authority created a political vacuum that persisted for nearly a century, during which various city-states attempted to establish regional dominance while Gutian raiders continued to threaten settled populations throughout Mesopotamia. This period of fragmentation, known traditionally as the Dark Age of Mesopotamian history, witnessed the destruction of many urban centers and the abandonment of extensive agricultural territories that could no longer be defended against nomadic incursions. The city of Lagash emerged as one of the few Sumerian centers to maintain effective governance during this chaotic period, largely through the leadership of Gudea, who ruled as Ensi from approximately 2144 to 2124 BC. Rather than attempting to restore imperial authority through military conquest, Gudea focused on internal development and diplomatic accommodation with Gutian leaders. This pragmatic approach enabled Lagash to preserve Sumerian cultural traditions and administrative practices, while avoiding the destructive conflicts that devastated other regions. Gudea's building programs at Lagash demonstrate the remarkable resilience of Sumerian civilization despite the broader political collapse. His reconstruction of the Temple of Ningorsu incorporated architectural innovations that combined traditional Sumerian design principles with new decorative elements influenced by contact with foreign cultures. The temple complex featured elaborate sculptural programs that depicted the ruler in various ceremonial contexts, providing detailed visual records of Sumerian religious practices and royal ideology during this transitional period. The numerous statues of Gudea discovered at Lagash reveal sophisticated sculptural techniques that surpass the artistic achievements of the Akkadian period. These works, carved from imported diorite stone, demonstrate mastery of hard stone carving that required specialized tools and techniques. The realistic portrayal of facial features and clothing details reflects careful observation and artistic skill, while the inscriptions covering the statues preserve extensive information about temple construction, religious ceremonies, and administrative practices. The gradual weakening of Gutian control during the early 22nd century BC created opportunities for Sumerian cities to reassert their independence and begin the process of political reunification. The expulsion of Gutian forces from central Mesopotamia required coordinated military action by several city-states working in alliance, marking the beginning of a remarkable cultural and political revival that would restore Sumerian civilization to unprecedented heights of achievement. Ur-Nammu, who established the third dynasty of Ur around 2112 BC, emerged as the architect of the Sumerian Renaissance through a combination of military prowess, administrative innovation, and cultural patronage that synthesized the best elements of previous Mesopotamian civilizations. His origins as governor of Ur under the last Sumerian king of Uruk provided him with intimate knowledge of both local administration and broader regional politics, enabling him to develop strategies that addressed the complex challenges of post-imperial reconstruction. The military campaigns that established Ur-Nammu's authority throughout Sumer required tactical innovations that could overcome both residual Gutian forces and rival Sumerian city-states that had grown accustomed to independence during the preceding century of fragmentation. Rather than relying solely on traditional infantry formations, Ur-Nammu's armies incorporated mobile units, equipped with improved bronze weapons, and organized according to standardized tactical doctrines that maximized coordination between different military specialties. The siege of Uruk, which brought the most prestigious Sumerian city under Ur-Nammu's control, demonstrated the sophisticated military engineering capabilities that characterized Neo-Sumerian warfare. Ur-Nammu's forces constructed elaborate circumvallation works that completely surrounded the city, preventing relief forces from reaching the defenders while maintaining supply lines for the besieging army. These engineering projects required precise surveying and construction techniques that reflected the revival of technical expertise that had been disrupted during the Gutian period. The restoration of unified Sumerian control enabled Ur-Nammu to implement comprehensive administrative reforms that addressed the institutional weaknesses that had contributed to the Akkadian collapse. Rather than attempting to govern vast territories through centralized imperial bureaucracy, the Neo-Sumerian system balanced central authority with substantial local autonomy that enabled efficient administration while reducing the administrative burden on royal resources. The Code of Ur-Nammu, promulgated around 2100 BC, represents the earliest comprehensive legal system in human history and established precedents for jurisprudence that would influence legal development throughout the ancient world. Unlike later legal codes that focused primarily on criminal penalties, Ur-Nammu's legislation addressed civil disputes, commercial transactions, and family relationships that required standardized procedures for resolution. The code's emphasis on monetary compensation rather than physical punishment reflected sophisticated understanding of social relationships and economic principles. The legal provisions governing agricultural disputes reveal the complex property relationships that had developed in Sumerian society by the late 3rd millennium BC. The code established procedures for resolving conflicts over irrigation rights, field boundaries, and crop-sharing arrangements that reflected the intensive agricultural systems supporting Neo-Sumerian urban centers. These regulations required precise measurement techniques and standardized valuation methods. Commercial law provisions in Ur-Nammu's code addressed the expanded trade relationships that connected Neo-Sumerian cities with distant regions throughout the Near East and beyond. Regulations governing contract enforcement, debt collection, and partnership agreements provided legal frameworks that enabled merchants to engage in complex long-distance transactions with reasonable assurance that their investments would be protected. The standardization of weights, measures, and currency values facilitated interregional commerce while reducing disputes over measurement and valuation. The code's family law provisions reflected the relatively high status of women in Neo-Sumerian society, while establishing clear procedures for marriage, divorce, and inheritance that protected the interests of all family members. Women retained property rights after marriage and could initiate divorce proceedings under specified circumstances, indicating legal recognition of female agency that distinguished Sumerian law from many later legal traditions. The detailed regulations governing inheritance rights of children, spouses, and extended family members provided stability for family relationships while preventing conflicts that could destabilize social order. The implementation of Ur-Nammu's legal code required the development of professional judicial institutions staffed by trained legal specialists who possessed detailed knowledge of statutory provisions and precedent cases. Court records from Neo-Sumerian cities reveal sophisticated legal procedures that included witness testimony, documentary evidence, and standardized forms of legal argumentation. These judicial systems provided accessible mechanisms for dispute resolution, that reduced reliance on traditional kinship-based methods of conflict management. The administrative innovations introduced during Ur-Nammu's reign extended far beyond legal reform to encompass comprehensive reorganization of governmental institutions and procedures. The establishment of standardized weights and measures throughout the Neo-Sumerian state eliminated the confusion and fraud that had characterized commercial transactions during the period of political fragmentation. Royal workshops produced bronze weight standards according to precise specifications, while official measuring vessels ensured consistency in grain transactions and tax assessments. The development of sophisticated record-keeping systems enabled Neo-Sumerian administrators to manage complex governmental functions with unprecedented efficiency and accuracy. Thousands of cuneiform tablets from administrative archives record transactions involving agricultural production, craft manufacturing, labor assignments, and military provisioning with remarkable detail and precision. These documents reveal mathematical capabilities and organizational methods that surpass the achievements of earlier Mesopotamian civilizations. The administrative archives from Drahem, a specialized livestock management center established during Ur-Nammu's reign, provide extraordinary insight into the systematic organization of Neo-Sumerian economic activities. This facility processed tens of thousands of cattle, sheep, and goats annually for redistribution to temples, government offices, and military units throughout the kingdom. The detailed records of animal receipts, processing, and distribution demonstrate logistical capabilities that enabled efficient resource management across extensive territories. The construction projects initiated under Ur-Nammu's patronage required coordination of massive labor forces and material resources that tested the limits of Neo-Sumerian administrative capabilities. The Great Ziggurat of Ur, begun during his reign and completed under his successor Shulgi, incorporated approximately 720,000 baked bricks and required the labor of thousands of workers over several construction seasons. The precise planning and execution of such projects demanded sophisticated project management techniques and quality control procedures. The ziggurat's construction revealed advanced understanding of structural engineering principles that enabled the creation of stable multi-story buildings using mud brick construction techniques. The builders incorporated drainage systems within the structure to prevent water damage, while carefully calculated foundation systems distributed the enormous weight of the superstructure across stable soil conditions. The standardization of brick dimensions and construction methods enabled different work crews to contribute compatible components to the overall project. The reign of Shulgi, Ur-Nammu's son, who ruled from 2094 to 2047 BC, witnessed the full flowering of Neo-Sumerian civilization and the achievement of administrative sophistication that would not be equaled in Mesopotamia for many centuries. Shulgi's 47-year reign provided the stability necessary for long-term development projects, while enabling the refinement of governmental institutions and cultural practices that had been established during his father's more turbulent period of initial conquest and consolidation. The military reforms implemented during Shulgi's reign transformed the Neo-Sumerian army from a traditional levy-based force into a professional military establishment capable of sustained operations across vast distances. Professional soldiers received standardized equipment and training that enabled tactical coordination between units drawn from different regions, while specialized engineering corps provided siege capabilities and logistical support for extended campaigns. The establishment of permanent garrisons in frontier regions provided early warning of potential threats while maintaining imperial authority in distant territories. The expansion of Neo-Sumerian control during Shulgi's reign extended imperial boundaries to their greatest extent, encompassing territories from the Persian Gulf to the Zagros Mountains, and from the Syrian desert to the Iranian plateau. This territorial expansion required diplomatic as well as military initiatives, as Shulgi negotiated alliance agreements with local rulers who maintained nominal independence while acknowledging Neo-Sumerian supremacy. These diplomatic arrangements reduced the military burden of imperial defense while providing access to regional resources and trade routes. The cultural achievements of Shulgi's reign included patronage of literary and scholarly activities that produced some of the finest examples of Sumerian literature, the standardization of scribal education throughout the Neo-Sumerian state created shared cultural standards and literary traditions that unified educated elites across diverse regional populations. Temple schools and palace academies developed curricula that combined traditional Sumerian texts with new compositions, celebrating contemporary achievements and royal ideology. The Gilgamesh epic, which achieved its classic form during this period, represents the culmination of Mesopotamian literary development and demonstrates the sophisticated narrative techniques and thematic complexity that characterized Neo-Sumerian cultural achievements. The epic's exploration of themes including friendship, mortality, and the relationship between civilization and nature reflected the intellectual sophistication of Neo-Sumerian society, while preserving ancient cultural traditions in forms that would influence literature throughout subsequent history. The administrative systems and cultural achievements that characterized Shulgi's reign could not prevent the gradual erosion of Neo-Sumerian power that became increasingly evident during the final decades of the Third Dynasty of Ur. The enormous territorial extent of the empire strained resources beyond sustainable limits, while the professional military establishment that had enabled territorial expansion consumed ever larger portions of imperial revenue. Simultaneously, Amorite nomadic groups from the Syrian desert began infiltrating Mesopotamian territories in increasing numbers, establishing settlements that challenged traditional patterns of urban control over agricultural resources. The Amorites possessed distinct cultural characteristics that distinguished them from both Sumerians and Akkadians, though they readily adopted aspects of Mesopotamian civilization while maintaining their tribal social organization and pastoral economic practices. These Semitic-speaking peoples had been present on the margins of Mesopotamian civilization for centuries, serving as traders, mercenaries, and seasonal laborers who moved between desert camps and urban centers according to economic opportunities and climatic conditions. Their gradual transition from nomadic to settled existence occurred through incremental processes of cultural adaptation rather than sudden conquest or displacement. The weakening of central authority during the reign of Ibbi-Sin, the last king of the Third Dynasty of Ur, who ruled from 2028 to 2004 BC, created opportunities for ambitious Amorite leaders to establish independent principalities in regions that had previously acknowledged Neo-Sumerian supremacy. Unlike the Gutian invasions that had destroyed the Akkadian Empire through military conquest, the Amorite expansion occurred primarily through peaceful infiltration and gradual assumption of local authority. As imperial control weakened, the city of Babylon emerged as the most successful of these Amorite principalities under the leadership of Sumu-Abum, who established the first dynasty of Babylon around 1894 BC. The strategic location of Babylon on the Euphrates River, approximately 85 kilometers south of modern Baghdad, provided access to both northern and southern Mesopotamian territories, while controlling crucial transportation routes that connected the region with Syria and Anatolia. This geographic advantage enabled the early Babylonian rulers to develop commercial relationships and military alliances that gradually expanded their territorial control. Sumu-Abum's successors systematically expanded Babylonian authority through a combination of military conquest, diplomatic negotiation, and economic pressure that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the complex political dynamics that had emerged following the collapse of unified imperial control. Rather than attempting immediate restoration of empire-wide authority, these rulers focused on consolidating control over strategically important territories while building the administrative and military capabilities necessary for eventual broader expansion. The reign of Sin-Mubilit, who ruled from 1812 to 1793 BC, marked a crucial phase in Babylonian territorial expansion through successful campaigns against rival city-states that had maintained independence since the fall of the Third Dynasty of Ur. His conquest of Sippar provided control over important agricultural territories and trade routes connecting Babylon with northern Mesopotamian cities, while his victories over Ashnuna and Larsa eliminated the most dangerous competitors for regional supremacy in central and southern Mesopotamia. The military innovations that enabled Babylonian success reflected adaptation of traditional Mesopotamian warfare techniques to the changed political and technological conditions of the early 2nd millennium BC. Babylonian armies incorporated larger numbers of professional soldiers equipped with improved bronze weapons, while siege warfare techniques had evolved to overcome the enhanced fortifications that many cities had constructed during the period of political fragmentation. The systematic use of battering rams, siege towers, and undermining operations enabled Babylonian forces to capture heavily fortified positions that would have resisted earlier siege methods. The ascension of Hammurabi to the Babylonian throne in 1792 BC initiated the most significant phase of territorial expansion and administrative innovation in early Mesopotamian history since the Akkadian Empire. Unlike his predecessors who had focused primarily on regional consolidation, Hammurabi conceived and executed systematic campaigns that brought virtually all of Mesopotamia under unified Babylonian control. His 43-year reign witnessed revolutionary developments in law, administration, and royal ideology that would influence governmental practices throughout the ancient Near East for more than a millennium. Hammurabi's early military campaigns concentrated on eliminating remaining independent city-states in southern Mesopotamia, while establishing defensive positions against potential threats from neighboring regions. The conquest of Uruk in 1787 BC brought the most prestigious Sumerian city under Babylonian control, providing both symbolic legitimacy and access to the extensive agricultural territories that had supported urban civilization in the region for more than 1,500 years. The subsequent capture of Isin completed Babylonian dominance over the traditional Sumerian heartland. The northern campaigns that brought Assyria under Babylonian control represented Hammurabi's most ambitious military undertaking and demonstrated the sophisticated logistical capabilities that characterized his mature military organization. The siege of Ashur, the ancient Assyrian capital, required coordination of supply lines extending more than 400 kilometers from the Babylonian heartland, while maintaining effective siege operations against one of Mesopotamia's most formidable fortifications. The successful completion of this campaign established Babylonian authority over territories extending from the Persian Gulf to the foothills of Anatolia. The integration of conquered territories into a unified administrative system required institutional innovations that addressed the cultural and linguistic diversity of populations that had previously maintained distinct governmental traditions. Rather than imposing uniform Babylonian practices throughout the empire, Hammurabi's administration adapted imperial policies to local conditions while maintaining central control over crucial functions, including taxation, military recruitment, and legal adjudication. The famous Code of Hammurabi, promulgated around 1750 BC, represents the most comprehensive and sophisticated legal system produced in the ancient world and established jurisprudential principles that continue to influence modern legal thinking. The Code's 282 laws addressed virtually every aspect of social and economic relationships, providing standardized procedures for resolving disputes while establishing clear penalties for various categories of offenses. Unlike earlier legal codes that had focused primarily on specific types of cases, Hammurabi's legislation attempted to create comprehensive frameworks for legal decision-making that could be applied consistently throughout the diverse territories of the Babylonian Empire. The code's organizational structure reflected sophisticated understanding of legal principles and social relationships that enabled systematic treatment of complex jurisprudential issues. The laws were arranged in logical categories that progressed from general principles governing royal authority and religious obligations to specific regulations addressing commercial transactions, property rights, family relationships, and criminal penalties. This systematic organization enabled legal professionals to locate relevant provisions quickly, while ensuring comprehensive coverage of potential dispute categories. The principle of proportional justice that permeates Hammurabi's code established the foundation for legal concepts that would influence jurisprudential development throughout subsequent history. The famous eye for an eye provisions reflected sophisticated understanding of punishment theory that sought to match penalties to offenses while preventing excessive retaliation that could destabilize social order. However, the code's actual application of this principle varied according to the social status of involved parties, with different penalties prescribed for offenses involving nobles, commoners, and slaves. The commercial law sections of Hammurabi's code addressed the complex economic relationships that had developed in Mesopotamian urban civilization, providing legal frameworks for various types of business transactions and commercial disputes. Detailed regulations governing contracts, partnerships, loans, and property transfers created predictable legal environments that facilitated long-distance trade and commercial investment. The standardization of interest rates, debt collection procedures, and bankruptcy regulations provided stability for economic relationships, while protecting both creditors and debtors from exploitation. The code's treatment of agricultural relationships reflected the crucial importance of farming and irrigation management in Mesopotamian society, while addressing the complex property rights and labor arrangements that had evolved over centuries of intensive cultivation. Regulations governing field rental, sharecropping agreements, and irrigation maintenance established clear responsibilities for landowners, tenants, and agricultural workers, while providing mechanisms for resolving disputes over crop shares, water rights, and land boundaries. Family law provisions in Hammurabi's code established comprehensive frameworks for marriage, divorce, inheritance, and child custody that balanced individual rights with social stability concerns. The code recognized various forms of marriage arrangements while establishing clear procedures for property division and child support in cases of divorce. Women retained significant legal rights, including the ability to own property, conduct business transactions, and initiate legal proceedings, though their legal status remained subordinate to male family members in many contexts. The criminal law sections of the code established detailed penalties for various categories of offenses, while incorporating principles of evidence evaluation and judicial procedure that ensured fair treatment for accused individuals. The code distinguished between intentional and accidental harm, provided different penalties for crimes committed against different social classes, and established procedures for witness testimony and oath-taking that reduced the likelihood of false accusations and wrongful convictions. The implementation of Hammurabi's legal code required the development of professional judicial institutions staffed by trained legal specialists who possessed detailed knowledge of statutory provisions and legal precedents. Court records from Babylonian cities reveal sophisticated legal procedures that incorporated written documentation, witness testimony, and standardized forms of legal argumentation. These judicial systems provided accessible mechanisms for dispute resolution that reduced reliance on traditional methods of conflict management, while ensuring consistent application of legal principles throughout the empire. The establishment of Babylon as the empire's cultural and intellectual center attracted scholars, artists, and craftsmen from throughout Mesopotamia and beyond, creating cosmopolitan environments that fostered innovation and cultural synthesis. The royal library and scribal schools at Babylon preserved and transmitted literary traditions from earlier Mesopotamian civilizations, while producing new works that reflected contemporary intellectual developments and royal patronage priorities. Mathematical innovations during Hammurabi's reign built upon earlier Mesopotamian computational traditions, while developing new techniques that enabled more sophisticated calculations and problem-solving methods. Babylonian mathematicians refined the sexagesimal system inherited from Sumerian tradition, creating standardized procedures for handling fractions, calculating areas and volumes, and solving algebraic problems that would not be equaled in mathematical sophistication until the development of Greek mathematics more than a millennium later. The mathematical tablets from the Old Babylonian period reveal computational capabilities that enabled precise calculation of compound interest, geometric progressions, and complex architectural measurements required for major construction projects. These mathematical techniques had practical applications in commercial transactions, agricultural planning and engineering projects that supported the administrative and economic functions of imperial governance. Astronomical observations conducted by Babylonian scholars during this period established the foundation for systematic study of celestial phenomena that would influence scientific development throughout the ancient world. The regular recording of planetary positions, lunar phases, and seasonal variations created databases that enabled prediction of astronomical events and development of accurate calendar systems. These observations required mathematical analysis techniques that pushed Babylonian computational capabilities to new levels of sophistication. The integration of astronomical knowledge with religious and administrative practices created calendar systems that coordinated agricultural activities, religious festivals, and governmental functions according to predictable temporal frameworks. The Babylonian calendar, based on lunar months with periodic intercalation to maintain alignment with seasonal cycles, provided stable chronological references that facilitated long-term planning and record-keeping throughout the empire. The architectural achievements of Hammurabi's reign reflected the enormous resources available to the Babylonian state and the sophisticated engineering capabilities that had developed through centuries of monumental construction experience. The reconstruction of Babylon's city walls created defensive systems that incorporated the latest developments in military engineering, while providing impressive visual symbols of royal power and urban prosperity. These massive fortifications, constructed from millions of baked bricks, extended for approximately 18 kilometers around the expanded city and incorporated defensive towers, gates, and internal compartments that could withstand prolonged siege operations. The palace complex constructed during Hammurabi's reign covered more than 2.5 hectares and included specialized areas for governmental administration, royal residence, and ceremonial functions. The throne room, measuring approximately 60 by 12 meters, could accommodate large assemblies of officials and foreign dignitaries, while providing impressive settings for royal audiences and diplomatic ceremonies. Adjacent administrative quarters housed the extensive bureaucratic apparatus required for imperial governance, including archives, treasuries, and offices for various governmental departments. The economic prosperity and administrative sophistication achieved under Hammurabi's reign established Mesopotamia as the dominant civilization of the ancient Near East, but the territorial extent and cultural influence of the Babylonian Empire could not prevent the gradual erosion of central authority that characterized the later centuries of the second millennium BC. Regional governors accumulated increasing autonomy as royal control weakened, while external pressures from Hittite expansion in Anatolia and Kassite infiltration from the Zagros Mountains created military challenges that strained imperial resources beyond sustainable limits. The political fragmentation that followed Babylon's decline created opportunities for ambitious rulers in northern Mesopotamia to develop new forms of military organization and territorial control that would ultimately surpass all previous achievements in imperial administration and conquest. The city of Ashur, strategically positioned on the Tigris River, approximately 350 kilometers north of Babylon, emerged as the center of this revolutionary transformation in military and political organization. The Assyrians had maintained their distinct cultural identity throughout centuries of Babylonian dominance, preserving traditional institutions and religious practices while adapting Mesopotamian administrative techniques to their particular geographic and demographic circumstances. The rugged terrain of northern Mesopotamia, with its rolling hills and seasonal rivers, required different agricultural methods and settlement patterns than the flat alluvial plains of Sumer and Babylon. This created social structures that emphasized military prowess and territorial expansion rather than intensive urban development. The rise of Tiglath-Pileser III, the Assyrian throne in 745 BC, marks the beginning of systematic military reforms that would transform Assyria from a regional kingdom into the most formidable military power the ancient world had yet witnessed. Unlike his predecessors who had relied on traditional levy systems and seasonal campaigns, Tiglath-Pileser conceived and implemented comprehensive reorganization of Assyrian military institutions that created professional standing armies capable of sustained operations across vast distances. His innovations in military technology, tactical doctrine, and logistical support established the foundation for territorial expansion that would bring virtually the entire Near East under Assyrian control. The introduction of iron weapons throughout Assyrian military units represented perhaps the most significant technological advancement in ancient warfare since the development of bronze metallurgy. Iron ore deposits in the Anatolian highlands provided Assyrian craftsmen with access to raw materials that could be processed into weapons and tools with superior hardness and durability compared to bronze implements. The smelting techniques required for iron production demanded higher temperatures and more sophisticated furnace construction than bronze working, but the resulting weapons possessed cutting edges that retained their sharpness longer and could penetrate bronze armor that had previously provided adequate protection. Assyrian metalworkers developed specialized techniques for producing different grades of iron and steel that optimized weapon performance for specific military applications. Sword blades incorporated carbon-rich steel edges welded to soft iron cores, creating weapons that combined flexibility with cutting power. Spear heads featured reinforced socket construction that prevented breakage during combat, while arrowheads were mass-produced according to standardized specifications that ensured consistent performance and simplified logistics. The systematic application of iron technology to military equipment provided Assyrian forces with decisive advantages over enemies who continued to rely on bronze weapons and traditional manufacturing methods. The development of sophisticated siege engines under Tiglath-Pileser III revolutionized ancient warfare by enabling systematic reduction of fortified positions that had previously been considered impregnable. Assyrian engineers constructed massive battering rams mounted on wheeled platforms and protected by bronze-plated roofs that could withstand defensive fire while delivering devastating impacts against city walls. These siege engines incorporated mechanical principles that concentrated enormous force at specific points, enabling breaching of walls constructed from stone or baked brick that could resist traditional assault methods. The famous bronze reliefs from Tiglath-Pileser's palace at Nimrud provide detailed visual documentation of these siege engines in operation, showing crews of soldiers maneuvering the massive devices into position while archers provided covering fire from protected positions. The reliefs reveal sophisticated understanding of mechanical engineering with siege engines featuring adjustable height mechanisms, protective armor plating, and internal compartments for crew protection. The construction of such devices required specialized craftsmen and substantial material resources, but their effectiveness in reducing enemy strongholds justified the investment by dramatically shortening siege operations. Assyrian military engineers also developed innovative techniques for undermining enemy fortifications through systematic excavation of tunnels beneath defensive walls. These operations required precise surveying to ensure tunnels reached their targets while avoiding detection by defenders, combined with engineering expertise to support excavations and prevent premature collapse. The undermining process typically concluded with the placement of combustible materials in excavated chambers, creating fires that weakened foundation stones and caused sections of walls to collapse, opening breaches that assault troops could exploit. The organization of Assyrian cavalry units represented another crucial innovation that provided tactical flexibility and striking power unavailable to armies that relied primarily on infantry formations. Unlike earlier Mesopotamian forces that had used horses primarily for pulling chariots, Assyrian military commanders developed techniques for mounted warfare that enabled cavalry units to operate independently as reconnaissance forces, pursuit troops, and mobile strike formations. The breeding programs that produced suitable war horses required substantial investment and specialized knowledge, but the resulting cavalry capabilities proved decisive in numerous campaigns. Assyrian horse breeding operations concentrated on developing animals with the size, strength, and temperament necessary for military service in diverse terrain conditions. Archaeological evidence from Assyrian sites reveals sophisticated understanding of equine genetics and training methods that produced horses superior to those available to most contemporary armies. Royal stud farms maintained detailed records of breeding lines and training procedures, while specialized personnel developed standardized methods for breaking, training, and maintaining military horses throughout their service careers. The tactical deployment of cavalry forces required coordination with infantry and chariot units that maximized the advantages of each military arm while compensating for their respective limitations. Assyrian battle formations typically positioned cavalry on the flanks of infantry arrays, enabling mounted troops to exploit breakthrough opportunities or respond to enemy flanking movements. The mobility of cavalry units also proved invaluable for maintaining communication between different sections of extended battle lines, and for pursuing defeated enemies to prevent their reorganization. The systematic organization of Assyrian chariot forces incorporated technological improvements that enhanced their effectiveness while adapting traditional designs to contemporary battlefield conditions. Assyrian chariots featured reinforced wheel construction with iron-tired rims that provided greater durability and traction, while improved suspension systems reduced crew fatigue during extended operations. The standardization of chariot dimensions and construction methods enabled mass production techniques that equipped large numbers of units with consistent performance characteristics. Chariot crews received specialized training that emphasized coordination between drivers and warriors, while developing tactical procedures for various combat situations. The integration of chariot forces with infantry and cavalry units required sophisticated command and control systems that could coordinate the movements of different military arms across extended battlefields. Assyrian military manuals preserved on cuneiform tablets provide detailed instructions for chariot tactics, maintenance procedures, and crew training that demonstrate the systematic approach to military organization that characterized Assyrian armed forces. The establishment of professional intelligence networks under Tiglath-Pileser III created information-gathering capabilities that provided Assyrian commanders with detailed knowledge of enemy capabilities, territorial resources, and political conditions throughout the Near East. These intelligence operations employed merchants, diplomats, and specialized agents who traveled throughout neighboring regions while collecting information about military preparations, economic conditions, and political developments that could affect Assyrian strategic planning. The intelligence reports preserved in Assyrian royal archives reveal remarkably sophisticated understanding of regional politics and military capabilities that enabled Assyrian rulers to exploit enemy weaknesses while avoiding unnecessary conflicts with powerful opponents. Detailed assessments of enemy troop strengths, fortification systems, and alliance relationships provided the foundation for strategic planning that maximized Assyrian advantages while minimizing risks and resource expenditures. The systematic collection and analysis of intelligence information represented a level of strategic sophistication that would not be equaled in ancient warfare for many centuries. Assyrian intelligence operations also included systematic efforts to destabilize enemy coalitions through diplomatic manipulation and economic pressure that weakened opposition before military campaigns began. These activities involved complex negotiations with local rulers, tribal leaders, and merchant groups that could provide support or neutrality during Assyrian operations. The coordination of military, diplomatic, and economic pressure created multiple leverage points that enabled Assyrian commanders to achieve strategic objectives with reduced reliance on purely military solutions. The reign of Sargon II, who ruled from 722 to 705 BC, witnessed the full implementation of military innovations initiated under Tiglath-Pileser III, while extending Assyrian territorial control to unprecedented limits. Sargon's systematic campaigns against the Kingdom of Israel, the Phrygian territories in Anatolia, and the Urartian strongholds in the Armenian highlands demonstrated the effectiveness of reformed Assyrian military institutions while establishing imperial boundaries that encompassed virtually all significant population centers and trade routes in the Near East. The siege and destruction of Samaria in 722 BC exemplified the devastating effectiveness of Assyrian siege warfare techniques, while implementing deportation policies that would become characteristic features of imperial administration. The 3-year siege required sustained logistical support for large military forces while coordinating multiple assault methods that eventually overwhelmed the city's defensive systems. The systematic deportation of the Israelite population following the city's capture eliminated potential centers of resistance while providing skilled workers and soldiers for other regions of the empire. Assyrian deportation policies represented sophisticated understanding of population management and social control that addressed the challenges of governing diverse ethnic and cultural groups across vast territorial expanses. Rather than attempting to eliminate conquered populations, Assyrian administrators relocated skilled craftsmen, agricultural workers, and administrative personnel to regions where their expertise could contribute to imperial economic development, while removing them from familiar territories where they might organize resistance movements. The establishment of Dur-Sharakin as Sargon's new capital demonstrated the enormous resources available to Assyrian rulers, while showcasing the architectural and engineering capabilities that characterized imperial administration. This planned city, constructed according to systematic urban design principles, covered approximately 3 square kilometers and incorporated specialized districts for governmental functions, military installations, and residential areas. The royal palace complex alone covered more than 10 hectares and included throne rooms, administrative offices, and ceremonial spaces that could accommodate the elaborate court ceremonies that reinforced royal authority. The construction of Dur-Sharakin required coordination of massive labor forces drawn from throughout the empire, including skilled craftsmen, specialized engineers, and thousands of workers who transported materials and performed construction tasks. The project's successful completion within Sargon's 17-year reign demonstrated administrative capabilities that could mobilize and coordinate resources across vast distances while maintaining quality control standards that ensured structural integrity and architectural consistency. The reign of Ashurbanipal, who ruled from 668 to 627 BC, marked the zenith of Assyrian imperial power, while witnessing revolutionary developments in scholarship and cultural preservation that would influence intellectual development throughout subsequent history. Unlike his predecessors who had focused primarily on territorial expansion and military conquest, Ashurbanipal combined continued military success with systematic efforts to collect, preserve, and organize the accumulated knowledge of Mesopotamian civilization. The Great Library established at Nineveh under Ashurbanipal's patronage represented the most ambitious scholarly project undertaken in the ancient world, bringing together literary, religious, scientific, and historical texts from throughout Mesopotamia and beyond. Royal scribes systematically copied manuscripts from temple and palace archives throughout the empire, creating comprehensive collections that preserved works spanning more than 2 millennia of Mesopotamian intellectual development. The library's holdings included approximately 30,000 cuneiform tablets, organized according to systematic cataloging procedures that enabled efficient retrieval and cross-referencing. The preservation of the Epic of Gilgamesh in its most complete form exemplifies the scholarly achievements of Ashurbanipal's library project, while demonstrating the sophisticated literary analysis and editorial techniques employed by royal scribes. The epic's various versions and fragments collected from different cities and time periods were systematically compared and integrated to create authoritative texts that preserved ancient literary traditions while ensuring their transmission to future generations. This editorial work required detailed knowledge of Mesopotamian literary conventions, linguistic development, and historical context that enabled accurate reconstruction of damaged or incomplete manuscripts. The library's scientific collections included mathematical texts, astronomical observations, medical treatises, and technical manuals that documented the accumulated practical knowledge of Mesopotamian civilization. These works preserved computational techniques, observational data, and theoretical frameworks that represented centuries of systematic investigation and experimentation. The organization of scientific materials, according to subject categories, enabled scholars to access relevant information efficiently while facilitating comparative analysis and theoretical development. The administrative systems developed to manage Ashurbanipal's vast territorial holdings incorporated innovations in communication, record-keeping, and provincial governance that enabled effective control over the largest empire the world had yet seen. The establishment of standardized reporting procedures throughout imperial provinces created information networks that provided central authorities with detailed knowledge of local conditions, resource availability, and potential security threats. These communication systems required extensive infrastructure, including road networks, relay stations, and courier services that maintained regular contact between provincial governors and royal administrators. The taxation procedures and communication networks that sustained Ashurbanipal's vast empire provided the administrative foundation for one of the most remarkable periods in Mesopotamian history. Following Ashurbanipal's death in 627 BC, the enormous territorial extent of Assyrian control began to strain under the weight of its own success, creating opportunities for ambitious rulers in Babylon to reassert their independence and establish what would become the final flowering of Mesopotamian civilization. The Neo-Babylonian period, spanning from 626 to 539 BC, witnessed architectural achievements and cultural developments that surpassed even the greatest accomplishments of earlier Mesopotamian civilizations, while demonstrating the accumulated technological and administrative expertise of nearly 3 millennia of urban development. Nebuchadnezzar II ascended to the Babylonian throne in 605 BC following his father Nabopolassar's successful rebellion against Assyrian control and the subsequent destruction of Nineveh in 612 BC. Unlike previous Mesopotamian rulers who had inherited established kingdoms, Nebuchadnezzar faced the enormous challenge of rebuilding Babylonian power from the ruins of Assyrian collapse while competing with emerging powers including the Median Empire in Iran and the expanding influence of Egypt under the 26th dynasty. His 43-year reign would transform Babylon into the most magnificent city the ancient world had ever witnessed, while establishing cultural and architectural standards that would influence urban development throughout subsequent history. The military campaigns that established Nebuchadnezzar's territorial control required adaptation of traditional Mesopotamian warfare techniques to address the changed strategic environment of the early 6th century BC. The collapse of Assyrian power had created a complex political landscape where multiple regional powers competed for control over crucial trade routes and agricultural territories, while new military technologies and tactical innovations demanded flexible responses from Babylonian commanders. Nebuchadnezzar's forces incorporated iron weapons and siege engines inherited from Assyrian military traditions, while developing new approaches to cavalry warfare and fortification construction that reflected contemporary battlefield conditions. The siege of Jerusalem in 597 BC demonstrated the sophisticated siege warfare capabilities that Nebuchadnezzar's engineers had developed through systematic study of Assyrian military techniques combined with their own innovations in siege engineering. The Babylonian forces constructed elaborate circumvallation works that completely surrounded the city while maintaining supply lines extending more than 800 kilometers from the Mesopotamian heartland. These engineering projects required precise surveying and construction techniques that enabled the creation of temporary military installations capable of supporting large armies throughout extended siege operations. The siege engines employed during the Jerusalem campaign incorporated mechanical improvements that enhanced their effectiveness against the advanced fortification systems that had been constructed throughout the Levant during the preceding centuries of Assyrian expansion. Babylonian battering rams featured reinforced bronze heads mounted on wheeled platforms protected by leather and metal armor that could withstand defensive fire while delivering concentrated force against specific sections of city walls. The systematic application of these siege techniques, combined with diplomatic pressure and economic blockade, eventually forced Jerusalem's surrender without the massive destruction that had characterized many Assyrian siege operations. The deportation of the Jewish population following Jerusalem's capture implemented population management policies that reflected Nebuchadnezzar's sophisticated understanding of imperial administration and social control. Rather than simply eliminating conquered populations, Babylonian administrators relocated skilled craftsmen, religious leaders, and educated individuals to Mesopotamia, where their expertise could contribute to imperial development projects while removing them from familiar territories where they might organize resistance movements. This systematic approach to population management created diverse urban communities that enhanced Babylonian cultural and intellectual life while providing the specialized skills necessary for ambitious construction projects. The famous Babylonian captivity that resulted from these deportation policies created unprecedented opportunities for cultural exchange and intellectual development that would profoundly influence both Mesopotamian civilization and the subsequent development of Judaism. The relocated Jewish communities brought with them sophisticated theological concepts, literary traditions, and historical perspectives that enriched Babylonian intellectual life while adapting their own cultural practices to Mesopotamian urban environments. The synthesis of Jewish and Babylonian traditions during this period produced religious and philosophical developments that would influence spiritual thinking throughout subsequent history. Jewish scholars in Babylonian exile encountered mathematical, astronomical, and literary traditions that had been accumulating in Mesopotamian cities for more than 2 millennia, creating opportunities for intellectual synthesis that enhanced both traditions. The complex theological questions raised by exile and cultural displacement stimulated sophisticated theological reflection that produced new approaches to understanding divine justice, historical causation, and individual responsibility. These intellectual developments would profoundly influence the subsequent development of Jewish thought while contributing to the cosmopolitan intellectual environment that characterized Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. The construction projects initiated under Nebuchadnezzar's patronage required coordination of massive labor forces and material resources that tested the limits of Babylonian administrative capabilities while producing architectural achievements that would be remembered throughout subsequent history. The reconstruction of Babylon's city walls created defensive systems that incorporated the latest developments in military engineering, while providing impressive visual symbols of royal power and urban prosperity. These massive fortifications, constructed from millions of baked bricks, extended for approximately 18 kilometers around the expanded city and incorporated defensive towers, gates, and internal compartments that could withstand the most advanced siege techniques available to contemporary armies. The famous Ishtar Gate, completed during Nebuchadnezzar's reign, exemplified the artistic and architectural sophistication that characterized late Mesopotamian civilization, while demonstrating the technical capabilities that enabled the creation of monumental structures with unprecedented decorative complexity. The gate's construction required approximately 575 glazed brick reliefs depicting dragons, bulls, and other symbolic animals arranged in sophisticated compositional patterns that created stunning visual effects through their brilliant blue, yellow, and white coloration. The glazing techniques employed in these decorations represented the culmination of ceramic technology that had been developing in Mesopotamian workshops for centuries. The production of glazed bricks for the Ishtar Gate required mastery of complex chemical processes that combined silica, alkali, and metallic compounds in precise proportions to create durable ceramic surfaces with consistent coloration and weather resistance. Babylonian craftsmen developed specialized kilns that could maintain the high temperatures necessary for proper glazing while providing controlled atmospheric conditions that ensured uniform results across thousands of individual brick components. The standardization of production techniques enabled the creation of large-scale decorative programs with consistent quality and visual coherence. The processional way that connected the Ishtar Gate to the city's ceremonial center represented one of the most ambitious urban planning projects in ancient history, creating a magnificent boulevard that showcased Babylonian artistic achievements while providing impressive settings for religious festivals and royal ceremonies. The roadway extended for approximately 1 kilometer through the heart of the city and featured walls decorated with glazed brick reliefs depicting lions, the sacred animal of the goddess Ishtar. These decorative programs required the production and installation of more than 1,000 individual relief panels, each crafted according to precise artistic specifications that ensured visual consistency throughout the extended composition. The engineering challenges involved in constructing the processional way required sophisticated understanding of urban drainage, foundation construction, and traffic management that enabled the creation of durable roadways capable of supporting heavy ceremonial processions while maintaining their decorative integrity. The roadway's foundation incorporated multiple layers of stone, gravel, and bitumen that provided stable support for the massive stone paving blocks, while preventing water damage from seasonal flooding. The precise grading and drainage systems ensured that surface water was efficiently channeled away from decorative elements, while maintaining smooth surfaces suitable for ceremonial use. The legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon, described by ancient authors as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, may have represented the most ambitious horticultural project ever attempted in the ancient Near East. Though their historical existence remains a subject of scholarly debate, classical sources describe elaborate terraced gardens supported by massive stone arches and irrigated through sophisticated hydraulic systems that lifted water from the Euphrates River to elevated planting areas. The engineering challenges involved in such a project would have required innovations in structural design, water management, and agricultural techniques that pushed Mesopotamian technical capabilities to their absolute limits. Archaeological investigations at Babylon have failed to identify definitive remains of the Hanging Gardens, leading some scholars to suggest that the classical descriptions may represent confused accounts of gardens constructed at other Mesopotamian cities or entirely legendary creations. However, the sophisticated irrigation technologies and architectural capabilities demonstrated by other Nebuchadnezzar construction projects suggest that Babylonian engineers possessed the technical expertise necessary for such ambitious horticultural undertakings. The debate over the garden's historical existence reflects the broader challenge of reconciling classical literary sources with archaeological evidence in ancient Near Eastern studies. The astronomical and mathematical achievements of Neo-Babylonian scholars represented the culmination of scientific traditions that had been developing in Mesopotamian cities since the early urban period. Babylonian astronomers developed systematic methods for predicting planetary positions, lunar eclipses, and seasonal variations that enabled the creation of accurate ephemeris tables used throughout the ancient world for calendar calculations and agricultural planning. These predictive capabilities required mathematical techniques that incorporated sophisticated understanding of cyclical patterns, numerical relationships, and computational procedures that would influence scientific development for centuries. The development of mathematical astronomy during Nebuchadnezzar's reign built upon earlier Mesopotamian observational traditions, while introducing new theoretical frameworks that enabled more precise predictions of celestial phenomena. Babylonian astronomers discovered that planetary motions could be described through mathematical functions that related position changes to time intervals, creating the foundation for quantitative approaches to astronomical prediction. These mathematical techniques required computational capabilities that pushed Mesopotamian mathematics to new levels of sophistication, while establishing methodological precedents that would influence Greek scientific development. The creation of detailed ephemeris tables that predicted lunar positions, planetary conjunctions and eclipse cycles, required systematic observations extending over multiple decades, combined with mathematical analysis techniques that could identify recurring patterns within complex data sets. Babylonian astronomers maintained detailed observational records that documented celestial phenomena with remarkable precision, creating databases that enabled statistical analysis and pattern recognition. These observational programs required institutional continuity and resource allocation that demonstrated the high value placed on astronomical knowledge by Neo-Babylonian rulers. The practical applications of Babylonian astronomical knowledge extended far beyond academic interest to encompass religious, agricultural, and administrative functions that were essential for effective governance of complex urban societies. Accurate calendar systems enabled coordination of religious festivals, agricultural activities, and administrative procedures, according to predictable temporal frameworks that enhance social organization and economic efficiency. The ability to predict eclipses and other unusual celestial events provided religious authorities with powerful tools for maintaining their spiritual authority while demonstrating divine favor for royal policies. The mathematical innovations developed by Neo-Babylonian scholars to support astronomical calculations included advances in numerical computation, geometric analysis, and algebraic problem solving that represented significant theoretical achievements. Babylonian mathematicians developed techniques for calculating square roots, solving quadratic equations, and analyzing geometric relationships that would not be surpassed in mathematical sophistication until the development of Greek theoretical mathematics several centuries later. These computational capabilities had practical applications in engineering, architecture, and commercial calculations that supported the complex economic and administrative activities of imperial governance. The influence of Neo-Babylonian mathematical and astronomical achievements extended throughout the ancient world through trade relationships, diplomatic contacts, and scholarly exchanges that disseminated Mesopotamian knowledge to Greek, Persian, and other intellectual traditions. Greek philosophers and mathematicians acknowledged their debt to Babylonian sources while adapting Mesopotamian techniques to their own theoretical frameworks and cultural contexts. The transmission of Mesopotamian scientific knowledge to Greek scholars established intellectual continuity that would influence scientific development throughout the classical period and beyond. The administrative systems developed to manage Nebuchadnezzar's territorial holdings incorporated innovations in record-keeping, communication, and resource management that enabled effective governance of diverse populations across extensive territories. The standardization of weights, measures, and currency throughout Babylonian territories facilitated interregional commerce while reducing transaction costs and commercial disputes. Royal workshops produced high-quality craft goods that were traded throughout the Near East, generating revenues that supplemented agricultural taxation and tribute payments from conquered territories. The economic prosperity and cultural magnificence achieved during Nebuchadnezzar's reign created the final flowering of independent Mesopotamian civilization, but the enormous resources devoted to monumental construction and urban development could not address the fundamental strategic vulnerabilities that would ultimately enable foreign conquest. The death of Nebuchadnezzar in 562 BC initiated a period of political instability and dynastic conflict that weakened Babylonian military capabilities, while external threats from the expanding Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great grew increasingly formidable. The sophisticated administrative systems and cultural achievements that had made Babylon the wonder of the ancient world would prove insufficient to maintain independence against the revolutionary military and political innovations that characterized Persian imperial expansion. The rise of Cyrus the Great to power in Persia around 559 BC introduced a fundamentally different approach to imperial organization that combined military effectiveness with administrative flexibility and cultural tolerance. Unlike previous Near Eastern empires that had relied primarily on military coercion and cultural assimilation to maintain control over conquered territories, The Persian system incorporated local traditions and governmental structures, while establishing overarching imperial frameworks that coordinated diverse populations and regions. This innovative approach to imperial administration would prove devastatingly effective against traditional Mesopotamian political systems that had been optimized for governing culturally homogeneous urban populations rather than vast multi-ethnic territories. Persian military innovations built upon centuries of nomadic warfare traditions from the Iranian plateau, while incorporating the most effective techniques developed by previous Near Eastern civilizations. Persian cavalry units possess superior mobility and tactical flexibility compared to Mesopotamian forces that continue to rely heavily on infantry formations and siege warfare techniques. The Persian military system emphasized rapid deployment, strategic deception, and coordinated attacks by combined arms formations that could exploit enemy weaknesses while avoiding prolonged engagements that favored defensive positions. The famous Persian mounted archers combined the mobility advantages of cavalry warfare with the long-range striking power that had characterized earlier Mesopotamian military innovations. These units could engage enemy formations at distances that prevented effective retaliation, while maintaining the tactical flexibility to withdraw rapidly if faced with superior opposition. The systematic training and equipment standardization that characterized Persian military organization enabled these cavalry forces to operate effectively across diverse terrain conditions while maintaining consistent tactical capabilities throughout extended campaigns. Persian siege warfare techniques incorporated innovations developed through systematic study of Assyrian and Babylonian military engineering, while adapting these methods to Persian strategic preferences for rapid conquest rather than prolonged investment operations. Persian engineers developed portable siege equipment that could be quickly assembled and deployed against enemy fortifications, enabling faster reduction of defensive positions, while minimizing the logistical burden of extended siege operations. The combination of superior mobility with effective siege capabilities provided Persian commanders with tactical options that previous Near Eastern armies had been unable to achieve. The internal political conflicts that plagued Babylon following Nebuchadnezzar's death created opportunities for Persian intelligence operations and diplomatic manipulation that weakened Babylonian resistance before military campaigns began. Nabonidus, who became king of Babylon in 556 BC, implemented religious policies that alienated traditional Mesopotamian priesthoods, while pursuing archaeological and antiquarian interests that diverted resources from military preparation and frontier defense. His extended residence at the oasis city of Tama in northwestern Arabia removed him from direct oversight of Babylonian governmental functions, while creating power vacuums that ambitious provincial governors and religious leaders attempted to fill. The religious controversies initiated by Nabonidus centered on his promotion of the moon god Sin at the expense of Marduk, the traditional patron deity of Babylon, whose cult had provided religious legitimacy for Babylonian royal authority throughout the Neo-Babylonian period. This theological innovation challenged fundamental aspects of Mesopotamian religious tradition while undermining the ceremonial relationships between royal authority and divine sanction that had been carefully maintained by previous rulers. The resulting conflicts with Babylonian priesthoods created internal opposition that Persian agents could exploit through diplomatic contacts and financial inducements. The Persian conquest of Lydia in 546 BC demonstrated the effectiveness of Cyrus's military innovations, while establishing Persian control over crucial trade routes connecting Mesopotamia with Anatolia and the eastern Mediterranean. The defeat of Croesus, the legendarily wealthy king of Lydia, sent shockwaves throughout the Near East and demonstrated that traditional defensive strategies were inadequate against Persian tactical innovations. The rapid collapse of Lydian resistance encouraged other regional powers to seek accommodation with Persian expansion rather than risk similar military disasters. The systematic Persian advance toward Mesopotamian territories proceeded through careful diplomatic preparation that isolated Babylon from potential allies while encouraging internal opposition to Nabonidus's unpopular policies. Persian agents established contact with disaffected Babylonian nobles, provincial governors and religious leaders who viewed Cyrus as a potential liberator from Nabonidus's controversial rule, rather than a foreign conqueror. This diplomatic groundwork enabled Persian forces to advance through Mesopotamian territories without encountering the fierce resistance that had characterized previous foreign invasions. The famous Cyrus cylinder, discovered at Babylon and dating to 539 BC, provides detailed documentation of Persian propaganda techniques that portrayed Cyrus as a legitimate ruler chosen by Marduk to restore proper religious observances and governmental practices. The cylinder's text emphasizes Cyrus's respect for Babylonian religious traditions and his commitment to maintaining established cultural institutions, while presenting Nabonidus as an impious ruler who had violated divine will through his religious innovations. This sophisticated propaganda campaign created ideological justification for Persian conquest, while encouraging Babylonian cooperation with the new imperial administration. The actual conquest of Babylon in October 539 BC occurred with remarkably little military resistance, reflecting the effectiveness of Persian diplomatic preparation and the extent of internal opposition to Nabonidus's rule. Contemporary sources describe the Persian army entering the city without battle, while Nabonidus fled to avoid capture. The rapid and relatively peaceful transition of power enabled Cyrus to present himself as a liberator rather than a conqueror, facilitating the integration of Mesopotamian territories into the Persian Empire while preserving the administrative and economic systems that had made Babylon prosperous. The Persian administrative system implemented in Mesopotamia incorporated existing Babylonian governmental structures while establishing imperial oversight mechanisms that ensured compliance with Persian policies and resource extraction requirements. Local administrators retained responsibility for day-to-day governmental functions, while Persian governors monitored activities and coordinated regional policies with imperial objectives. This flexible approach to provincial administration enabled efficient governance while minimizing cultural conflicts that could destabilize imperial control. The integration of Mesopotamian territories into the Persian Empire created unprecedented opportunities for cultural exchange and intellectual development that would influence civilization throughout the ancient world. Persian imperial policies actively encouraged the preservation and transmission of local cultural traditions, while facilitating communication between different regions and peoples within the empire. The cosmopolitan environment created by Persian administration enabled scholars, craftsmen, and merchants from diverse backgrounds to interact and exchange knowledge in ways that had been impossible under previous imperial systems. The gradual decline of cuneiform writing and Mesopotamian languages began almost immediately following the Persian conquest. Though this transformation occurred through gradual cultural change rather than deliberate imperial policy, Aramaic, which had been spreading throughout the Near East as a commercial lingua franca for several centuries, possessed practical advantages that made it increasingly attractive for administrative and commercial communications. The alphabetic Aramaic writing system required far less training than cuneiform literacy, while enabling more efficient record-keeping and correspondence across the diverse linguistic communities of the Persian Empire. The Persian imperial administration adopted Aramaic as the official language for governmental communications throughout the empire, creating practical incentives for Mesopotamian administrators, merchants, and educated individuals to develop Aramaic literacy rather than maintaining traditional cuneiform skills. Persian provincial governors communicated with imperial authorities in Aramaic, while commercial documents increasingly employed Aramaic scripts that could be understood by trading partners throughout the empire. This systematic adoption of Aramaic for practical communications gradually reduced the functional importance of cuneiform writing in daily life. The educational systems that had preserved and transmitted cuneiform literacy for more than 3 millennia began to contract as demand for traditional scribal skills declined in favor of Aramaic competency. Temple schools continued to maintain cuneiform traditions for religious purposes, but the career opportunities that had previously motivated young men to invest years in mastering complex cuneiform writing systems were increasingly available to those with Aramaic skills instead. The economic incentives that had sustained cuneiform education gradually shifted toward alphabetic literacy that provided greater practical utility in the Persian imperial context. The transformation of Mesopotamian linguistic practices occurred over several generations rather than through immediate replacement, creating transitional periods where both cuneiform and Aramaic systems operated simultaneously within different social and institutional contexts. Religious ceremonies, legal documents, and scholarly texts continued to employ cuneiform writing for centuries after the Persian conquest, while commercial transactions, administrative correspondence, and diplomatic communications increasingly utilized Aramaic scripts. This gradual transition preserved important aspects of Mesopotamian cultural tradition while adapting to changing practical requirements. The preservation and transmission of Mesopotamian knowledge through Persian, Greek, and Islamic scholars ensured that the intellectual achievements of nearly 3 millennia of urban civilization would continue to influence human development long after cuneiform writing had disappeared from daily use. Persian administrators recognized the value of Mesopotamian expertise in mathematics, astronomy, engineering, and medicine, actively supporting the translation of important texts into Aramaic and other languages that could be accessed by scholars throughout the empire. These translation projects preserved crucial knowledge while making it available to new generations of scholars who lacked cuneiform literacy. The mathematical traditions developed in Mesopotamian cities provided the foundation for Persian administrative systems that required sophisticated computational capabilities for taxation, resource management, and territorial administration. Babylonian mathematical techniques for calculating areas, volumes, and proportional relationships proved essential for managing the complex economic activities of imperial governance, while enabling precise measurement and allocation of resources across vast territories. Persian administrators adopted and adapted these mathematical methods, while transmitting them to other regions of the empire where they influenced local computational traditions. Mesopotamian astronomical knowledge proved particularly valuable for Persian imperial administration, which required accurate calendar systems and predictive capabilities for coordinating activities across diverse climatic and cultural regions. Babylonian ephemeris tables that predicted lunar phases, planetary positions, and seasonal variations enabled Persian administrators to maintain consistent chronological frameworks throughout the empire while accommodating local calendar traditions. The systematic observation and mathematical analysis techniques developed by Mesopotamian astronomers provided models for scientific investigation that would influence intellectual development throughout the Persian period and beyond. The engineering expertise accumulated through millennia of Mesopotamian urban development proved invaluable for Persian construction projects and infrastructure development throughout the empire. Mesopotamian techniques for irrigation system design, architectural construction, and urban planning provided technical knowledge that enabled Persian administrators to develop new cities and agricultural territories while maintaining existing urban centers. The systematic approach to engineering problem-solving that characterized Mesopotamian technical traditions influenced Persian infrastructure projects from Persepolis to the Indus Valley. Greek scholars who encountered Mesopotamian intellectual traditions through Persian imperial networks began systematic efforts to understand and adapt these knowledge systems to Greek theoretical frameworks and cultural contexts. The mathematical and astronomical achievements of Babylonian scholars provided crucial foundations for Greek scientific development. The transmission of Mesopotamian knowledge to Greek intellectual centers established continuity between ancient Near Eastern and classical Mediterranean civilizations that would prove crucial for preserving ancient achievements. The conquest of the Persian Empire by Alexander the Great in 331 BC created new opportunities for cultural synthesis and knowledge transmission that further disseminated Mesopotamian intellectual achievements throughout the Hellenistic world. Greek scholars working in Alexandria, Antioch, and other Hellenistic centers gained direct access to Mesopotamian texts and traditions, while contributing their own theoretical innovations to the accumulated body of ancient knowledge. This intellectual synthesis created new approaches to mathematics, astronomy, and natural philosophy that incorporated the best elements of both traditions. Islamic scholars during the medieval period undertook systematic translation projects that preserved crucial Mesopotamian texts, while adapting ancient knowledge to Islamic intellectual frameworks and practical requirements. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, established during the 9th century AD, became a major center for translating and studying ancient texts from various traditions, including important Mesopotamian works on mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. These translation efforts ensured that key aspects of Mesopotamian intellectual achievement would continue to influence human development throughout the Islamic period and beyond. The lasting legacy of Mesopotamian civilization in law, government, literature, science, and religion continues to influence modern society through multiple transmission pathways that connect contemporary institutions and practices to ancient precedents. The legal principles established in early Mesopotamian law codes provided foundational concepts for jurisprudential development throughout subsequent history, while governmental institutions first developed in Mesopotamian city-states established precedents for administrative organization, political authority that continue to influence modern governmental systems. The literary achievements of Mesopotamian civilization, particularly the Epic of Gilgamesh and other narrative traditions, established fundamental themes and storytelling techniques that continue to influence world literature. The exploration of universal human experiences, including friendship, mortality, and the relationship between civilization and nature, that characterize Mesopotamian literary works provided models for literary expression that transcended cultural and temporal boundaries. Modern readers continue to find relevance and meaning in these ancient narratives, demonstrating the enduring power of Mesopotamian literary achievement. The scientific methods and observational techniques developed by Mesopotamian scholars established precedents for systematic investigation and mathematical analysis that provided crucial foundations for subsequent scientific development. The quantitative approaches to astronomical observation, mathematical computation, and engineering problem-solving that characterized Mesopotamian intellectual traditions established methodological principles that continue to influence scientific investigation. Modern mathematics, astronomy, and engineering retain fundamental concepts and techniques that can be traced directly to Mesopotamian origins. The religious and philosophical concepts developed in Mesopotamian civilization provided crucial foundations for subsequent theological and philosophical development throughout the ancient world and beyond. The sophisticated understanding of divine human relationships, moral responsibility, and cosmic order that characterized Mesopotamian religious thought influenced the development of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, while contributing to philosophical traditions that continue to shape human understanding of fundamental existential questions. The urban planning principles, architectural techniques, and engineering solutions developed in Mesopotamian cities established precedents for city design and infrastructure development that continue to influence modern urban development. The systematic approaches to water management, transportation networks, and public space organization that characterized Mesopotamian urban planning provided models that have been adapted and refined throughout subsequent history while remaining fundamentally relevant to contemporary challenges of urban development and resource management. Thus, the Persian conquest of Babylon in 539 BC marked not the destruction of Mesopotamian civilization, but rather its transformation and integration into broader patterns of cultural development that would carry its achievements throughout the ancient world and beyond. The sophisticated governmental institutions, technological innovations, intellectual achievements, and cultural traditions that had developed over nearly 3 millennia of Mesopotamian urban civilization provided crucial foundations for subsequent human development, while establishing precedents and principles that continue to influence modern society. The end of independent Mesopotamian political authority represented the beginning of a new phase in the transmission and adaptation of ancient achievements that would ensure their continued relevance throughout subsequent history. The cuneiform tablets that lay buried in the ruins of ancient cities would eventually be rediscovered by modern archaeologists, providing direct access to the voices and experiences of humanity's first urban civilizations. Through these remarkable documents, modern scholars have gained unprecedented insight into the daily lives, governmental institutions, economic systems, and intellectual achievements of the peoples who created the foundations of civilized life. The legacy of Mesopotamia thus extends far beyond its historical influence to provide contemporary humanity with direct connection to its earliest urban ancestors and their remarkable achievements in transforming human society from nomadic bands to complex civilizations that established the patterns of organized life that continue to shape our world today. The transformation of Mesopotamian civilization under Persian rule marked not an ending, but rather the beginning of an extraordinary period of cultural synthesis and intellectual exchange that would reshape the ancient world. The Persian Empire's unprecedented scale, stretching from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea, created communication networks and trade relationships that facilitated the transmission of Mesopotamian achievements to civilizations that had previously remained isolated from Near Eastern developments. The administrative genius of Persian imperial organization lay in its ability to preserve and enhance local traditions while creating overarching systems that enabled coordination across vast distances and diverse populations. Unlike previous empires that had attempted to impose uniform cultural practices throughout their territories, Persian administrators recognized that effective governance required accommodation of regional differences and respect for established institutions. This pragmatic approach to imperial management enabled Mesopotamian cities to maintain their essential character while contributing their expertise to broader imperial projects. Babylon continued to function as a major administrative center, with its scribal schools, astronomical observatories, and craft workshops providing specialized services that were essential for managing the complex economic and logistical requirements of Persian rule. The famous Persian Royal Road, extending approximately 2,500 kilometers from Sardis in western Anatolia to Susa in southwestern Iran, incorporated existing Mesopotamian transportation networks while expanding them to unprecedented scales. This remarkable feat of engineering and administration enabled official communications to travel between the most distant provinces within weeks rather than months, creating information networks that surpassed anything previously achieved in human history. The construction and maintenance of the Royal Road required systematic application of engineering techniques that had been developed in Mesopotamian cities over millennia. Persian engineers adapted traditional methods for road construction, bridge building, and water management to create infrastructure that could support the enormous volume of traffic generated by imperial administration and commercial activities. Relay stations positioned at regular intervals provided fresh horses and supplies for royal messengers, while offering accommodation and services for merchants, diplomats, and other travelers. These installations became centers of cultural exchange, where ideas, technologies, and artistic traditions from diverse regions encountered and influenced each other in ways that would have been impossible under previous political arrangements. The economic integration of Mesopotamian territories into the Persian Empire created unprecedented opportunities for commercial expansion and technological innovation. The standardization of weights, measures, and currency throughout imperial territories eliminated many of the barriers that had previously limited long-distance trade, while Persian military control of crucial transportation routes provided security that enabled merchants to undertake extended expeditions with reasonable confidence in their safety. Mesopotamian merchants, drawing upon centuries of experience in long-distance commerce, quickly adapted to the expanded opportunities created by Persian imperial policies. They established trading networks that connected Babylonian workshops with markets in India, Central Asia, Anatolia, and the Eastern Mediterranean, carrying Mesopotamian crafts, agricultural products and manufactured goods to regions that had never previously experienced direct contact with Near Eastern civilization. The flow of goods along these trade routes facilitated parallel exchanges of knowledge, techniques, and cultural practices that enriched all participating civilizations. Mesopotamian mathematical methods, astronomical observations, and engineering solutions spread throughout the Persian Empire, while foreign innovations in metallurgy, textile production, and agricultural techniques were absorbed and adapted by Mesopotamian craftsmen and farmers. Persian imperial administration also created new opportunities for intellectual exchange through the systematic collection and preservation of knowledge from throughout the empire. Royal libraries established at major administrative centers gathered texts, maps, and technical manuals from diverse traditions, creating comprehensive repositories of human knowledge that enabled comparative studies and theoretical synthesis. The influence of Mesopotamian intellectual traditions on Persian scholarly activities became particularly evident in the development of astronomical and mathematical techniques required for imperial administration. Persian administrators needed accurate calendar systems to coordinate activities across regions with different seasonal patterns and traditional chronological frameworks, making Babylonian expertise in calendar calculation and astronomical prediction invaluable for effective governance. The adaptation of Mesopotamian astronomical knowledge to Persian administrative requirements led to significant theoretical developments that advanced the precision and scope of celestial observations. Persian scholars working with Babylonian astronomers developed new methods for predicting planetary positions and eclipse cycles that incorporated observational data from throughout the empire, creating more accurate computational techniques than had been possible using data from any single region. These collaborative research projects also facilitated the development of improved instruments and observational methods that enhanced the quality and consistency of astronomical data. The construction of standardized observation platforms at major cities throughout the empire enabled systematic collection of celestial measurements that could be compared and integrated to identify patterns and relationships that were invisible from any single observational location. The mathematical innovations that emerged from these imperial research programs built upon Mesopotamian computational foundations, while incorporating techniques and conceptual frameworks from other traditions within the Persian sphere of influence. The resulting synthesis created mathematical methods that were more sophisticated and versatile than any previous system, providing computational tools that would influence mathematical development throughout the ancient world. The Persian policy of cultural tolerance and institutional preservation enabled Mesopotamian religious traditions to continue evolving while adapting to the cosmopolitan environment of the imperial capital. Babylonian temples maintained their traditional ceremonial practices and theological frameworks while incorporating new elements that reflected contact with Persian, Egyptian, Greek, and other religious systems. This religious synthesis created innovative theological concepts that addressed questions about divine authority, cosmic order, and human destiny with unprecedented sophistication. The integration of Mesopotamian creation myths with Persian cosmological concepts produced new narratives that explained the relationship between divine and human realms in ways that accommodated both traditional beliefs and contemporary philosophical developments. The influence of these syncretic religious traditions extended far beyond Mesopotamian communities to shape theological thinking throughout the Persian Empire and beyond. Jewish communities that had been relocated to Babylonia during the Neo-Babylonian period continued to develop their religious concepts while engaging with Persian and Mesopotamian intellectual traditions, creating theological innovations that would profoundly influence the subsequent development of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The Persian period also witnessed remarkable developments in Mesopotamian artistic traditions, as craftsmen and artists adapted their techniques to serve the aesthetic preferences and ceremonial requirements of Persian imperial culture. The fusion of traditional Mesopotamian artistic conventions with Persian decorative motifs and foreign stylistic influences created new forms of visual expression that reflected the cosmopolitan character of imperial society. Mesopotamian artists working in Persian royal workshops developed innovative techniques for creating large-scale decorative programs that combined architectural, sculptural, and textile elements in integrated compositions. These artistic achievements demonstrated technical mastery that surpassed previous Mesopotamian accomplishments, while establishing aesthetic standards that would influence artistic development throughout the Persian territories. The preservation and transmission of Mesopotamian technical knowledge through Persian imperial networks ensured that crucial innovations in engineering, agriculture, and manufacturing would continue to benefit human development long after the political transformation of the region. Persian administrators recognized the practical value of Mesopotamian expertise and actively supported the documentation and dissemination of technical information throughout the empire. The systematic recording of irrigation techniques, construction methods, and manufacturing processes in standardized manuals enabled the application of Mesopotamian innovations in regions with different environmental conditions and resource availability. These adaptation projects required creative problem-solving that often led to further innovations and improvements in traditional techniques. The gradual emergence of Greek influence within the Persian Empire created new opportunities for cultural exchange that would prove crucial for preserving and transmitting Mesopotamian achievements to Western civilization. Greek merchants, scholars, and administrators who worked within Persian territories encountered Mesopotamian intellectual traditions and began systematic efforts to understand and adapt this knowledge to Greek theoretical frameworks. The mathematical and astronomical achievements of Babylonian scholars proved particularly attractive to Greek intellectuals who were developing their own approaches to quantitative analysis and scientific investigation. The precision and sophistication of Mesopotamian computational techniques provided models and inspiration for Greek mathematical development, while offering practical methods that could be immediately applied to contemporary problems. Greek scholars working in Persian administrative centers gained direct access to cuneiform libraries and astronomical archives that preserved centuries of observational data and theoretical analysis. This unprecedented opportunity to study Mesopotamian scientific traditions in their original context enabled more accurate understanding and more faithful transmission of ancient knowledge than would have been possible through indirect contacts. The translation projects undertaken by Greek scholars to make Mesopotamian texts accessible to audiences who lacked cuneiform literacy created bridges between ancient Near Eastern and classical Mediterranean intellectual traditions. These translation efforts required not only linguistic competence but also deep understanding of the theoretical frameworks and methodological assumptions that underlied Mesopotamian scientific and mathematical work. The synthesis of Mesopotamian and Greek intellectual traditions that emerged from these translation projects created new approaches to scientific investigation that incorporated the empirical precision of Babylonian astronomy with the theoretical sophistication of Greek mathematics. This intellectual fusion would prove enormously influential for subsequent scientific development throughout the Mediterranean world and beyond. The conquest of the Persian Empire by Alexander the Great in 331 BC created dramatically new political and cultural conditions that would further transform the preservation and transmission of Mesopotamian achievements. Alexander's policy of cultural fusion and his establishment of Greek cities throughout the former Persian territories created unprecedented opportunities for intellectual exchange between Eastern and Western traditions. The city of Alexandria, founded at the mouth of the Nile River, and destined to become the greatest center of learning in the ancient world, attracted scholars from throughout the known world, including many who possessed expertise in Mesopotamian mathematical, astronomical, and technical traditions. The famous Library of Alexandria became a repository for texts and knowledge from diverse civilizations, creating opportunities for comparative study and theoretical synthesis that had never previously existed. Mesopotamian astronomical texts preserved at Alexandria provided Greek scholars with access to observational records, extending over more than a millennium, enabling the development of more sophisticated theoretical models and predictive techniques than either tradition could have achieved. Independently, the integration of Babylonian empirical data with Greek geometric methods created new approaches to astronomical calculation that would influence scientific development for centuries. The mathematical traditions preserved at Alexandria also facilitated the development of more advanced computational techniques that built upon both Mesopotamian sexagesimal methods and Greek geometric analysis. The resulting mathematical synthesis created tools for solving complex problems in engineering, architecture, and commercial calculation that far exceeded the capabilities of any previous system. The preservation of Mesopotamian technical knowledge at Alexandria and other Hellenistic centers ensured that crucial innovations in engineering, agriculture, and manufacturing would continue to influence human development throughout the classical period. The systematic documentation of irrigation techniques, construction methods, and industrial processes enabled the application of Mesopotamian expertise to new environmental conditions and technological challenges. The gradual rise of Roman power in the Mediterranean created additional opportunities for the preservation and transmission of Mesopotamian achievements through imperial networks that connected diverse regions and civilizations. Roman administrators and engineers encountered Mesopotamian technical knowledge through their contacts with Hellenistic cities and Persian territories, adapting ancient innovations to serve the practical requirements of Roman imperial expansion. The Roman emphasis on practical engineering and efficient administration created demand for the types of expertise that had been developed in Mesopotamian cities over millennia. Roman architects and engineers studied Mesopotamian techniques for water management, foundation construction, and large-scale building projects, adapting ancient methods to create infrastructure that could support the enormous populations and complex economic activities of Roman cities. The legal traditions that had been developed in Mesopotamian cities also influenced Roman jurisprudence through contacts with Hellenistic legal scholars, who preserved and transmitted ancient precedents. The principles of proportional justice, evidence evaluation, and procedural fairness that characterized Mesopotamian law codes provided models for Roman legal development while offering practical solutions to contemporary administrative challenges. The agricultural techniques that had enabled Mesopotamian cities to support large urban populations also proved valuable for Roman territorial expansion and colonization projects. Roman agricultural experts studied Mesopotamian irrigation methods, crop rotation systems, and soil management practices, adapting these techniques to diverse environmental conditions throughout the Mediterranean world. The religious and philosophical concepts that had developed in Mesopotamian cities during thousands of years of urban civilization continued to influence spiritual and intellectual development throughout the Roman period. The sophisticated understanding of divine human relationships, cosmic order, and moral responsibility that characterized Mesopotamian religious thought provided foundations for theological developments that would shape Western civilization. The early Christian communities that emerged within the Roman Empire inherited many theological concepts and narrative traditions that had originated in Mesopotamian religious contexts. The influence of ancient Near Eastern creation myths, flood narratives, and legal principles can be traced through Jewish and early Christian texts, demonstrating the continued relevance of Mesopotamian cultural achievements for spiritual development. The rise of Islam in the 7th century AD created new opportunities for preserving and transmitting Mesopotamian intellectual achievements through systematic translation projects and scholarly research programs. The Islamic conquest of former Persian and Byzantine territories brought Muslim scholars into contact with libraries and educational institutions that preserved texts and traditions extending back to ancient Mesopotamian civilizations. The establishment of the House of Wisdom in Baghdad during the Abbasid Caliphate created the most ambitious program for collecting, translating, and studying ancient texts that had been undertaken since the Library of Alexandria. Muslim scholars working in Baghdad gained access to Mesopotamian mathematical, astronomical, and medical texts that had been preserved in Persian and Aramaic translations, enabling systematic study of ancient scientific traditions. The translation of Mesopotamian mathematical texts into Arabic facilitated the development of Islamic mathematics that built upon ancient computational foundations, while incorporating new theoretical innovations. The sexagesimal numerical system, developed in ancient Mesopotamia, continued to influence Islamic mathematical work, particularly in astronomical calculations and engineering applications. Islamic astronomers working in Baghdad and other centers of learning had access to Babylonian observational records that extended over more than a millennium, providing empirical foundations for theoretical developments that advanced the precision and scope of astronomical prediction. The integration of ancient observational data with Islamic theoretical innovations created new approaches to celestial mechanics that would influence scientific development throughout the medieval period. The medical traditions that had been developed in Mesopotamian cities also influenced Islamic medicine through translations of ancient texts that preserve therapeutic knowledge and diagnostic techniques. The systematic approach to medical observation and treatment that characterized Mesopotamian healing practices provided models for Islamic medical development, while offering practical methods for addressing contemporary health challenges. The engineering expertise that had enabled Mesopotamian cities to create sophisticated urban infrastructure continued to influence Islamic architectural and engineering projects through preserved texts and practical traditions. The techniques for water management, foundation construction, and large-scale building that had been developed over millennia of Mesopotamian urban development provided crucial knowledge for Islamic city planning and construction projects. The agricultural innovations that had supported Mesopotamian urban civilization also proved valuable for Islamic territorial expansion and economic development. Islamic agricultural experts studied ancient irrigation methods, crop cultivation techniques, and soil management practices, adapting Mesopotamian expertise to diverse environmental conditions throughout the expanding Islamic world. The preservation of Mesopotamian legal traditions through Islamic jurisprudence created continuity between ancient and medieval approaches to law and governance. The principles of evidence evaluation, procedural fairness, and proportional justice that had characterized Mesopotamian legal systems influenced Islamic legal development while providing practical frameworks for administrative and judicial decision-making. The philosophical and theological concepts that had been developed in Mesopotamian religious contexts continued to influence Islamic intellectual development through preserved texts and oral traditions. The sophisticated understanding of divine authority, cosmic order, and human responsibility that characterized ancient Near Eastern religious thought provided foundations for Islamic theological and philosophical development. The transmission of Mesopotamian intellectual achievements through Islamic scholarly networks ensured that ancient knowledge would continue to influence human development throughout the medieval period and beyond. Islamic scholars working in Spain, North Africa, and other regions carried Mesopotamian mathematical, astronomical, and technical knowledge to areas that had never previously experienced direct contact with Near Eastern civilization. The eventual transmission of Islamic scholarly works to European centers of learning during the medieval period created new opportunities for Western scholars to encounter and study Mesopotamian intellectual traditions. The translation of Arabic texts into Latin made ancient Near Eastern knowledge accessible to European scholars who began to appreciate the sophistication and relevance of Mesopotamian achievements. The revival of classical learning during the European Renaissance created renewed interest in ancient civilizations and their contributions to human development. European scholars working with Greek, Latin, and Arabic sources began to recognize the fundamental importance of Mesopotamian innovations for the development of mathematics, astronomy, engineering, and other fields of knowledge. The archaeological discoveries of the 18th and 19th centuries provided direct access to Mesopotamian texts and artifacts that had been buried for millennia, enabling modern scholars to study ancient civilizations in unprecedented detail. The decipherment of cuneiform writing opened vast archives of Mesopotamian literature, legal documents, commercial records, and scientific texts that revealed the complexity and sophistication of ancient urban civilization. These archaeological revelations transformed understanding of human cultural development by demonstrating that sophisticated governmental institutions, legal systems, mathematical techniques, and scientific methods had been developed thousands of years before the classical civilizations of Greece and Rome. The recognition that Mesopotamian cities had created the foundational innovations of urban civilization revolutionized historical understanding and established the ancient Near East as the cradle of human cultural development. The continued study of Mesopotamian achievements through modern archaeological research and textual analysis has revealed the extent to which contemporary civilization remains dependent upon innovations that were first developed in ancient Near Eastern cities. The systematic approaches to law, governance, mathematics, astronomy, engineering, and urban planning that characterize modern society can be traced directly to Mesopotamian origins. The influence of Mesopotamian legal traditions on contemporary jurisprudence demonstrates the enduring relevance of ancient approaches to justice and social organization. The principles of evidence evaluation, procedural fairness, and proportional punishment that were established in early law codes continue to influence modern legal systems throughout the world. The mathematical innovations developed in Mesopotamian cities provided the computational foundations for all subsequent mathematical development. From Greek geometry to modern calculus and beyond, the sexagesimal system continues to influence contemporary timekeeping and angular measurement, while the fundamental concepts of numerical notation and algebraic calculation derive directly from Mesopotamian origins. The astronomical methods developed by Mesopotamian scholars established the observational and theoretical foundations for all subsequent astronomical research, the systematic recording of celestial phenomena, and the mathematical analysis of planetary motions that characterized Babylonian astronomy provided models for scientific investigation that continue to influence contemporary research. The engineering techniques developed in Mesopotamian cities for water management, construction, and urban planning continue to influence modern infrastructure development. The systematic approaches to irrigation, drainage, and foundation construction that enabled ancient cities to flourish in challenging environments provide models for contemporary engineering projects in similar conditions. The urban planning principles that guided the development of Mesopotamian cities established patterns of spatial organization and resource management that continue to influence contemporary city design. The integration of residential, commercial, religious, and administrative areas within coherent urban frameworks provides models for modern urban development that remain relevant to contemporary planning challenges. The agricultural innovations that supported Mesopotamian urban civilization continue to influence modern farming techniques and food production systems. The methods for irrigation, crop rotation, and soil management that were developed over millennia of Mesopotamian agricultural experience provide practical knowledge that remains valuable for contemporary agricultural development. The commercial and financial institutions that emerged in Mesopotamian cities established the basic frameworks for economic organization that continue to influence modern business practices. The concepts of contract law, credit relationships, and market regulation that were developed in ancient Near Eastern commercial centers provided foundations for all subsequent economic development. The educational systems that preserved and transmitted Mesopotamian knowledge created institutional models for learning and scholarship that continue to influence contemporary educational practice. The systematic approaches to curriculum development, professional training, and knowledge preservation that characterized Mesopotamian schools provided frameworks for educational organization that remain relevant to modern learning environments. The literary achievements of Mesopotamian civilization continue to influence contemporary narrative and poetic traditions through themes and techniques that address universal human experiences. The exploration of friendship, mortality, heroism, and the relationship between civilization and nature that characterized ancient Near Eastern literature established patterns of artistic expression that continue to resonate with modern audiences. The religious and philosophical concepts developed in Mesopotamian cities continue to influence contemporary spiritual and intellectual development through ideas and practices that address fundamental questions about human existence and cosmic order. The sophisticated understanding of divine human relationships, moral responsibility, and social justice that characterized ancient Near Eastern religious thought provides foundations for contemporary theological and ethical reflection. The technological innovations that enabled Mesopotamian cities to create sophisticated urban civilizations continue to influence modern industrial and manufacturing processes. The systematic approaches to metallurgy, textile production, ceramic manufacture, and other crafts that were developed over millennia of Mesopotamian urban development provide technical knowledge that remains valuable for contemporary industrial applications. The preservation and transmission of Mesopotamian achievements through successive civilizations demonstrates the cumulative nature of human cultural development and the importance of maintaining connections with historical foundations. The recognition that contemporary civilization builds upon innovations and insights developed thousands of years ago in ancient Near Eastern cities provides perspective on the continuity and unity of human cultural evolution. The study of Mesopotamian civilization also provides crucial insights into the challenges and opportunities that accompany urban development and social complexity. The successes and failures of ancient Near Eastern cities offer lessons about sustainable resource management, effective governance, social integration, and cultural preservation that remain relevant to contemporary challenges. The environmental history of Mesopotamian civilization demonstrates both the possibilities and the limitations of human attempts to modify natural systems for agricultural and urban development. The long-term consequences of intensive irrigation, urban concentration, and resource extraction in ancient Mesopotamia provide important case studies for understanding contemporary environmental challenges and developing sustainable approaches to development. The political history of Mesopotamian civilization illustrates the dynamics of imperial expansion, cultural integration, and administrative innovation that continue to influence contemporary international relations. The successes and failures of ancient Near Eastern empires offer insights into the challenges of governing diverse populations across vast territories while maintaining cultural coherence and administrative effectiveness. The economic history of Mesopotamian civilization demonstrates the importance of trade relationships, technological innovation, and institutional development for supporting complex urban societies. The commercial networks and financial institutions that connected ancient Near Eastern cities provide models for understanding contemporary economic relationships and developing effective approaches to international commerce. The cultural history of Mesopotamian civilization reveals the processes through which diverse traditions interact, influence each other, and create new forms of expression that transcend their individual origins. The synthesis of Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, and Persian traditions that characterized Mesopotamian development provides insights into contemporary challenges of cultural integration and identity formation. The intellectual history of Mesopotamian civilization demonstrates the cumulative nature of human knowledge development and the importance of preserving and transmitting cultural achievements across generations. The mathematical, astronomical, legal, and literary traditions that were developed and maintained in ancient Near Eastern cities provide models for contemporary approaches to education, research, and cultural preservation. Thus, the story of Mesopotamian civilization extends far beyond its chronological boundaries to encompass the entire sweep of human cultural development from ancient times to the present. The innovations and achievements of the world's first urban civilizations continue to shape contemporary life in ways that are often invisible but always fundamental to our collective human experience. The cuneiform tablets that preserve the voices and experiences of ancient Mesopotamian peoples provide direct connections to our earliest urban ancestors and their remarkable achievements in creating the foundations of civilized life. Through these extraordinary documents, we can trace the development of human social organization from simple agricultural villages to complex imperial systems, while recognizing the fundamental continuities that connect ancient and modern approaches to the challenges of urban existence. The lasting legacy of Mesopotamian civilization in contemporary life demonstrates the enduring relevance of ancient achievements and the importance of maintaining connections with our cultural foundations. The recognition that modern society builds upon innovations developed thousands of years ago in the valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers provides perspective on both the antiquity of human cultural development and the continuity of our collective human experience. As we reflect on this remarkable journey through nearly 3 millennia of Mesopotamian civilization, we gain appreciation for the complexity and sophistication of human achievement, while recognizing our own place within the continuing story of cultural development. The ancient cities of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria were not merely historical curiosities but living laboratories where our ancestors developed the institutional frameworks, technological innovations, and cultural traditions that continue to shape our contemporary world. The story of Mesopotamian civilization thus provides both historical perspective and contemporary relevance, reminding us that human cultural development is a cumulative process that builds upon the achievements of previous generations while continuously adapting to new challenges and opportunities. The innovations and insights developed in ancient Near Eastern cities remain vital components of our collective human heritage and continue to influence our approaches to the fundamental challenges of organized social life. In understanding the achievements and legacy of Mesopotamian civilization, we gain deeper appreciation for the remarkable journey that has brought humanity from its earliest tentative experiments in urban organization to the complex global civilization of today. The story of the world's first cities and empires provides both inspiration for continued cultural development and wisdom for addressing the challenges that face our contemporary world. The enduring influence of Mesopotamian civilization on modern life serves as a powerful reminder that human achievement is cumulative and that the innovations of the past continue to shape the possibilities of the future. As we face contemporary challenges in governance, technology, environmental management, and social organization, we can draw upon the accumulated wisdom of our Mesopotamian ancestors who confronted similar challenges and developed solutions that have stood the test of time. The story of Mesopotamian civilization ultimately demonstrates the remarkable capacity of human creativity and intelligence to transform challenging environments into flourishing centers of cultural achievement. From the earliest agricultural settlements in the Fertile Crescent to the magnificent cities of Babylon and Nineveh, the peoples of ancient Mesopotamia created foundations for human civilization that continue to support and inspire our contemporary world. Their legacy lives on not only in the specific innovations and institutions they created, but also in the broader demonstration that human societies can develop sustainable approaches to complex challenges through cooperation, innovation, and the systematic accumulation of knowledge and experience. The story of Mesopotamian civilization thus provides both historical understanding and contemporary inspiration for our ongoing efforts to create a more just, prosperous, and sustainable human future.